Gary Henderson stares at his damaged oxygen mask, knowing the decision he faces will end his life but save two others. The cargo security specialist's neural interface projects the stark numbers across his field of vision. 43 minutes of breathable atmosphere remaining in this section of the Stellar Pioneer. The rescue ships won't arrive for 2 hours. Through the reinforced viewport of the sealed cargo hold, he watches the two young Iridians huddled together. Their crystalline bodies reflect the emergency lighting in complex patterns, their translucent forms trembling with each distant rumble that courses through the ship's damaged hull. Kex and Zara, children of Thea, the Iridian diplomatic attaché, press their faceted hands against the transparent barrier, their refraction patterns shifting in what Gary recognizes as distress. The meteor strike had come without warning on the Iridian trade route, tearing through the vessel's hull and separating the children from their mother. Now Thea is trapped in a different section, unreachable through the maze of depressurized corridors. Gary's neural interface streams a constant feed of deteriorating ship status reports. Primary power, offline. Emergency lighting, functioning at 62% capacity. Hull integrity, critically compromised. The cargo hold's damaged airlock bleeds precious oxygen into space with each passing second. His fingers dance across the holographic interface, accessing the ship's database. The information confirms what he already knows: Iridian children, with their crystalline biology, can survive up to 6 hours without atmosphere. Their bodies store oxygen within their lattice structures, requiring far less than humans to sustain life. His own pressure suit, damaged in the initial impact, lies useless at his feet. The backup oxygen mask in his hands contains exactly 90 minutes of breathable air, enough to keep him alive until his oxygen runs out, or enough to keep two Iridian children breathing until rescue arrives. The ship's AI calculates his survival probability at 0.3% if he attempts to transfer the children to a secure section. Another violent shudder rocks the ship. The emergency lighting flickers, casting sharp shadows across the cargo hold. Gary watches the children's light-refracting bodies pulse with fear. At 45, he spent 2 decades in Earth's Merchant Marine Corps preparing for scenarios like this. But no training could have prepared him for the weight of this moment. His neural interface maps the shortest route to the secure section. The path will take him through 3 depressurized compartments. Without his pressure suit, exposure to those vacuum-like conditions will be fatal. Gary removes his standard-issue combat vest and begins reconfiguring the oxygen mask's delivery system to support Iridian biology. The children watch him with their crystalline eyes, their forms shifting colors in the dim emergency lighting. Time is running out. The ship's hull groans under the strain of structural failure. Gary's decision is made. He begins the emergency protocol to save the children, knowing each step brings him closer to his end. Gary's fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the oxygen mask's interface, completing the final adjustments for Iridian respiration. The crystalline children tracked his movements, their faceted forms casting prismatic patterns on the cargo hold's walls. A quick scan revealed a damaged maintenance panel near the hold's aft section. Gary activated his neural interface's diagnostic mode, searching for access to the ship's crawlway system. The panel yielded to his security override, revealing a narrow passage that stretched into darkness. "Computer, activate maintenance lighting in section C7, Gary commanded. The neural interface responded with a soft chime as strips of emergency illumination flickered to life within the passage. The ship lurched. Gary steadied himself against the wall as his neural display flooded with updated warnings. The structural integrity calculations shifted from bad to worse. Complete atmospheric loss would occur in 39 minutes. "Kex, Zara," Gary called through the barrier. He projected a simple holographic demonstration of his plan, showing the children how they would need to move. Their crystalline bodies dimmed slightly, a response that sent Gary's heart racing. They were already showing signs of oxygen deprivation. He salvaged what he could from his ruined pressure suit, detaching the magnetic boots and reinforced gloves. The boots would prove essential for navigating sections where artificial gravity might fail. The gloves' enhanced grip would help him climb through the unstable passages ahead. A screech of metal echoed through the ship as Gary accessed the maintenance robot controls. His fingers flew across the holographic interface, programming the machines to clear debris from their escape route. The robots whirred to life, their servos straining against collapsed internal structures. The ship's communication system crackled. A familiar crystalline form materialized in Gary's neural display. Thea, the children's mother. Her image flickered with interference, but her message came through clear. "Gary, we're sealed in the forward science bay. 4 of us. The section is stable, but we can't reach the children." Her voice carried the distinctive harmonics of translated Iridian speech. "Save them, please." "I will," Gary replied, already moving to the material fabrication unit. The system hummed as it constructed a harness system from remaining cargo materials. The fabricator's power levels dropped steadily with each component. Gary worked quickly, checking and double-checking each connection point of the harness. The ship's rotation had begun to angle them toward a deadly debris field, another threat the rescue ships might not reach them in time to prevent. The final piece of the harness emerged from the fabricator just as its power cell died. Gary entered the cargo hold's emergency access code and stepped through the barrier. The crystalline children moved toward him, their forms reflecting the deep red emergency lighting. He secured Kex first, carefully fitting the harness around the child's angular form. Zara followed, her crystalline structure pulsing with what Gary interpreted as nervous energy. The neural interface updated its calculations. 35 minutes of oxygen remaining. The children's survival probability had increased to 78, 3% if he could get them to the emergency shelter pod. Gary approached the maintenance access panel, checking the seal on the children's modified oxygen delivery system one final time. The passage ahead stretched through the ship's failing infrastructure like an artery through a dying body. His neural display mapped the route in glowing lines, highlighting structural weaknesses and potential hazards. The magnetic boots activated with a soft hum as Gary pulled himself into the crawlway. The children's crystalline forms pressed against his back, their combined weight shifting with each movement. Above them, the ship's superstructure groaned under increasing stress. The maintenance robots continued their work ahead, clearing a path through the chaos of the damaged vessel. "Hold tight," Gary instructed, beginning their ascent toward the emergency shelter pod. The neural interface projected their route through 2 decks of increasingly unstable ship architecture. Behind them, the cargo hold's emergency lighting finally failed, plunging that section into darkness. The maintenance passage engulfed them in shadows broken only by strips of emergency lighting. Gary's knees scraped against the metal grating as he crawled forward, the weight of the children shifting against his back with each movement. His neural interface projected a ghostly overlay of their route through the cramped space, warning indicators flashing at the edges of his vision. "Status update," Gary subvocalized to the ship's AI. Numbers scrolled across his field of view. Oxygen levels, structural integrity percentages, radiation readings. None of them promised good news. A violent shudder ran through the ship's frame. Gary activated his magnetic boots just as the artificial gravity fluctuated, preventing them from floating free in the suddenly weightless environment. The children's crystalline forms clinked softly against his harness. "Hold on tight," he instructed, checking their vital signs through his neural interface. The usually vibrant patterns within their crystalline bodies had dulled to a fraction of their normal brilliance. The medical database highlighted their declining oxygen saturation levels with pulsing red markers. The passage ahead branched into three separate routes. Gary's neural interface displayed probability calculations for each path, updating in real time as the ship's condition deteriorated. The shortest route, passing near the reactor housing, glowed an angry red with radiation warnings. The longest path offered the safest transit but would consume precious minutes they couldn't spare. A mechanical grinding echoed through the walls as emergency bulkheads began sealing off sections of the ship. Gary increased his pace, muscles burning as he pulled them through a particularly narrow section. The ship's rotation created new stresses on the hull, evidenced by the creaking metal surrounding them. Approaching Junction 7 Alpha, the AI announced. Warning. Atmospheric seal failure detected ahead. Gary paused at an intersection, his breaths coming in measured gasps. The maintenance bot he'd reprogrammed whirred ahead, its sensors mapping the structural damage. The bot's feed showed a 15-meter stretch of exposed vacuum where the hull had split open. The neural interface chimed with an incoming transmission. The rescue ship's message scrolled across his vision, confirming their delayed arrival time. Gary's oxygen readout displayed 22 minutes remaining, not nearly enough to reach safety. His sensors detected the pocket of trapped atmosphere in a nearby emergency airlock. The oxygen reserve could extend his survival time, but the children's vital signs continued to deteriorate. Their crystalline bodies had entered oxygen conservation mode, surfaces becoming increasingly opaque as their internal structures redirected resources to essential functions. The maintenance bot returned, projecting a detailed scan of the vacuum-exposed section. Handholds lined the walls at irregular intervals, their integrity questionable after the hull breach. The magnetic boots would provide stability, but crossing the gap would expose them to hard vacuum. Gary accessed the emergency airlock's controls but kept moving past it. The reserve oxygen would serve better as an emergency backup for the children. His neural interface updated their survival probability, 64% and falling. Beginning vacuum traverse, Gary announced to the ship's log. Time mark. 21 minutes remaining. He secured the children's harness attachments one final time, checking the seals on their modified oxygen delivery system. The breach loomed ahead, a tear in the ship's skin that opened into the starfilled void. Gary's boots magnetized firmly to the deck plating as he approached the edge. Behind him, Keck's and Zara's crystalline forms pulsed with waves of deep blue and iridian stress response. The maintenance bot positioned itself on the far side of the gap, its lights providing a beacon to guide them across. Gary grasped the first handhold, testing its strength before beginning their crossing. Above them, debris from the initial impact drifted past, glinting in the light of distant stars. Each step required precise placement of the magnetic boots. Each handhold needed careful testing before bearing their combined weight. Gary's neural interface projected the safest path across the gap, updating as debris impacts and structural shifts created new hazards to avoid. 20 meters remained between them and the emergency shelter pod. The children's vital signs continued their gradual decline as Gary navigated through the exposed section, his own oxygen supply counting down with merciless precision. Gary focused on the three parallel maintenance rails spanning the 15-meter gap. The ship's rotation had created new stress patterns across the hull, sending vibrations through the exposed section. His neural interface highlighted the rail's structural integrity readings in urgent red. Computer, analyze maintenance rail stability, Gary subvocalized. The response appeared instantly, 90 seconds until complete structural failure. He removed the emergency oxygen mask, his lungs burning as he exhaled completely. The core vacuum survival protocols activated automatically through his neural interface, triggering emergency medical subroutines. Blood vessels constricted as his body attempted to maintain consciousness in the near-vacuum environment. Stay still, he instructed the children, securing their harness one final time. Their crystalline forms had dulled to an alarming shade of gray. Gary gripped the central rail with his reinforced gloves, testing its strength. His magnetic boots locked onto the outer rails with each careful step. The void stretched around them, scattered debris glinting in starlight. 7 meters across, a massive impact punctured the hull plating nearby. The shock wave traveled through the ship's frame, triggering cascading microfractures along the maintenance rails. Gary's neural interface projected structural failure warnings with each step. A piercing screech echoed through the chamber as a chunk of meteor debris struck the hull. Wall panels tore free, tumbling toward them in the zero-gravity environment. The maintenance bot whirred into position, its metallic frame intercepting the deadly projectiles. Sparks erupted from its chassis as multiple impacts crushed its sensor array and mobility systems. Gary's neural interface detected dangerous stress patterns forming within the children's crystalline structures. Microscopic fractures spread through their bodies like spider webs. The medical database flashed urgent warning system shock would prove fatal within minutes. His fingers flew across the neural interface controls, accessing the trapped atmosphere pocket he discovered earlier. The ventilation system responded, redirecting the precious oxygen through maintenance ducts around them. The children's forms brightened slightly as their bodies absorbed the enriched air, but the reserve supply depleted rapidly. Structural collapse pattern detected, the ship's AI announced. Current position compromised in 28 minutes. Gary accessed the route calculations, sweat beading on his face despite the vacuum's cold. The only viable path now led through the hydroponics section. His neural display outlined the new route in pools in yellow, highlighting the ruptured fertilizer tanks that had flooded the compartment. The maintenance rails groaned beneath them. Gary increased his pace, ignoring the burning in his muscles as they neared the far side. His vision blurred, capillaries rupturing in his eyes from vacuum exposure. The medical subroutines pumped emergency stabilizers through his damaged suit systems, fighting to keep him conscious. They reached solid deck plating just as the rails gave way, tearing free from their mounts with a soundless shudder. Gary's neural interface screamed warnings about his deteriorating condition. The vacuum exposure had caused severe internal damage. His lungs felt like shattered glass, and decompression sickness sent waves of pain through his joints. Life signs detected, the AI reported as they approached the hydroponics section. Crew member Marcus Simpson, located in sealed equipment room adjacent to current route. Gary's neural display showed Marcus's location, trapped but alive in a pressurized compartment. The survival probability calculations updated instantly. Attempting a rescue would drop the children's chances by 32%. The ship's frame buckled around them as Gary pulled himself toward the hydroponics access hatch. His medical readings continued to deteriorate, internal damage spreading despite the emergency treatments. The children's crystalline forms pressed against his back, their surfaces reflecting the emergency lighting in increasingly erratic patterns. Ahead, toxic fertilizer solution had pooled in the corridor, its surface rippling with the ship's movement. Gary's neural interface mapped a path across the maintenance grating above the contaminated liquid. To their right, Marcus's life signs pulsed steadily on the sensor display, a silent reminder of the impossible choice that awaited. Gary checked the route calculations one final time, his gaze shifting to Marcus's life sign readings. The neural interface projected a possible rescue path requiring only a 4-meter deviation. With oxygen levels critical for the Iridian children, he couldn't justify leaving a survivor behind, especially one with potentially vital resources. His neural link connected to the equipment room systems, fingers dancing through virtual commands. The door's emergency release mechanism engaged with a hydraulic hiss, then screeched to a halt. Metal groaned as the opening widened to roughly 60 centimeters. Marcus Simpson. Gary called through the gap, his voice raw from vacuum exposure. Over here, a strained voice replied. The maintenance technician sat propped against a toolbox, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Thought everyone had evacuated already. Gary's medical scans assessed Marcus's injury a clean break from falling equipment. More importantly, his sensors detected an intact emergency oxygen pack on Marcus's belt. "I've got two Iridian children," Gary explained, gesturing to the crystalline forms on his back. "Their oxygen levels are critical." Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. Without hesitation, he unclipped his oxygen pack. "Take it. They need it more than I do." The ship lurched violently, sending tools clattering across the deck. Gary's neural interface flashed new warnings the vessel's rotation was accelerating dangerously. Above them, pipes burst in the hydroponics section. Caustic fertilizer solution began dripping through ceiling panels. The chemical composition. Gary's interface analyzed the green liquid. "It'll destroy their crystalline structure on contact." Marcus dragged himself to a maintenance terminal, his injured leg leaving a trail across the deck. "We've got drone shells in storage. Could modify them into shields." Gary connected to Marcus's terminal, combining their access codes. The maintenance bay's inventory appeared in his neural display. Working together, they stripped two service drones of their outer casings, reinforcing the shells with polymer sealant from Marcus's toolkit. The fertilizer solution pooled at the corridor's low point, creeping steadily toward their position. Gary's interface counted down, 11 minutes until chemical exposure. His hands moved quickly, securing the makeshift shields around the children's crystalline bodies. Marcus passed him the oxygen pack. "My maintenance codes are loaded on your neural link now. You'll need them for the waste reclamation routes." Gary connected the fresh oxygen supply, his burning lungs finally getting relief. The medical subroutines displayed damage reports: ruptured capillaries, tissue trauma, micro-tears throughout his respiratory system. The interface calculated continued degradation despite the oxygen influx. An explosion rocked the aft section. New structural warnings cascaded across Gary's vision as the ship's AI updated their escape route. Debris would completely seal their planned path in 23 minutes. "The waste reclamation system," Marcus pointed to a maintenance schematic. "It's your only option now. Watch for the methane pockets in processing chamber 3. Gary checked the children's vital signs. The crystalline patterns had stabilized slightly with the new oxygen supply, but stress fractures continued spreading through their structures. The drone shells added weight to his already exhausted frame, but they were essential protection now. "What about you?" Gary asked, though he already knew the answer. Marcus shook his head, gesturing to his mangled leg. "I'd slow you down. Besides, someone needs to monitor the structural integrity from here. I can guide you through the processing channels." The deck plating vibrated as another section of hydroponics ruptured. Gary's interface mapped the toxic liquid spread 8 minutes until their position was compromised. The waste reclamation route glowed in his neural display, a maze of temperature warnings and atmospheric hazards. He activated the drone shell's protective seals, checking the integrity of each connection. The children's vital signs pulsed steadily, but their crystalline surfaces had developed a web-like pattern of microfractures. The ship's AI calculated 35 minutes to reach the emergency shelter pod through waste reclamation. The debris field would intersect their position in 32. Gary moved toward the corridor, each step carefully placed to balance the children's increased weight. The drone shells hummed softly, their modified power cells maintaining a protective barrier against the caustic environment ahead. "The primary processing valve opens in 90 seconds, Marcus's voice came through the neural link. "After that, you'll have a clear shot through chamber 2. Green liquid dripped from overhead pipes as Gary entered the hydroponics section. His boots splashed through shallow pools of the solution, the drone shells deflecting any droplets that threatened the children. Ahead, the waste reclamation access hatch waited, its surface covered in warning symbols and chemical hazard markers. The waste reclamation access hatch groaned as Gary activated the release mechanism. Corrosive fertilizer solution dripped onto his shoulders, sizzling against his suit's protective layers. The drone shell barriers deflected the caustic liquid away from the children's crystalline forms, their added mass pulling against his aching muscles with each step. His neural interface connected to the waste system controls, Marcus's maintenance codes providing instant access. A network of green pathways illuminated across his vision, marking viable routes through the processing channels. The interface mapped automated cleaning protocols that had maintained several pressurized sections. Rerouting waste flow from processing channel Delta 7, Marcus's voice crackled through the neural link. You'll have a clear path through the next 3 junctions. Gary's boots splashed through shallow pools of fertilizer solution as he maneuvered toward the first junction. The drone shells hummed steadily, their modified power cells maintaining protective fields around Kex and Zara. His interface showed their crystalline patterns stabilizing with the supplemental oxygen, though networks of hairline fractures still spread across their surfaces. A violent shudder ran through the ship's frame. Warning indicators flashed across Gary's vision as his neural interface detected a massive power surge. Steam erupted from ruptured processing units ahead, filling the corridor with superheated vapor. Temperature rising, the ship's AI announced. Critical threshold for crystalline structures in 40 seconds. Gary accessed the emergency coolant controls, fingers dancing through virtual commands. Freezing mist sprayed from overhead nozzles as he redirected the overflow prevention system. The steam dissipated, creating a temperature-controlled corridor. His lungs seized as he inhaled, tissue damage from the vacuum exposure spreading through his respiratory system. The medical subroutines pumped stabilizers into his bloodstream, fighting to maintain basic organ function. Red warning indicators tracked his declining vital signs. The ship lurched sideways, artificial gravity fluctuating as they entered the planetoid's influence. Gary stumbled, catching himself against a processing conduit. His neural display updated their trajectory. The vessel's rotation pulled them closer to the debris field with each passing minute. Structural integrity failing in sections 12 through 15, Marcus reported. Adjusting your route. The primary waste channel is buckling. You'll need to take the auxiliary processing line. Metal groaned around them as Gary navigated through the diverted passage. His boots squelched through processed organic material, the decomposing mass releasing small clouds of oxygen. The neural interface analyzed the gas mixture, confirming its safety for both species. Oxygen concentration at viable levels, the AI reported. Supplemental supply can be conserved for critical sections. Gary transmitted a status update to the approaching rescue vessel, warning them of the cascade failure threatening the forward science bay. His neural interface's power reserves dropped dangerously low, limiting his access to ship systems. The processed material provided unstable footing, each step requiring careful balance to avoid disturbing the children's protective shells. His damaged lungs burned with every breath, internal bleeding spreading despite the medical subroutine's efforts. The interface projected his remaining functional time, 43 minutes before complete system failure. They reached the intersection with the primary cooling infrastructure. Gary's neural display lit up with urgent warnings as power readings from the cooling system spiked erratically. Ahead, reinforced coolant pipes rattled in their mounting brackets, frost forming along hairline stress fractures. Power surge detected in primary coolant circulation, the AI announced. Catastrophic system failure imminent. Supercooled reactor coolant breach predicted in 3 minutes. The children's vital signs flickered as temperature sensors detected the first waves of cold air leaking from the damaged pipes. Gary studied the neural interface's structural display, searching for a path around the failing cooling system. The drone shell's power cells blinked amber warnings their temperature protection abilities would fail quickly against direct coolant exposure. Behind them, the waste processing channel groaned as gravity distortions twisted the ship's frame. The intersection ahead offered two possible routes: a maintenance crawlway running parallel to the coolant pipes, or a vertical shaft leading to the secondary waste filtering system. Neither path guaranteed protection from the imminent coolant breach. Frost crept across the deck plating as the temperature continued to drop. Gary's neural interface projected the coolant spread pattern, a killing wave of super-chilled gas that would prove instantly fatal to the Iridian children's crystalline biology. The countdown to system failure blinked relentlessly in his vision, 2 minutes remaining. Gary's neural interface scanned the engineering schematics, highlighting a maintenance bypass tunnel running parallel to the coolant infrastructure. The reinforced shielding between the tunnel and coolant pipes offered protection from the impending system failure. Maintenance access detected, the AI reported. Bypass tunnel retains structural integrity. Emergency route calculated. He maneuvered toward the access point, each step increasingly difficult as the ship's rotation intensified. Debris tumbled through the waste reclamation system, pulled by shifting pressure differentials. His magnetic boots anchored him to the deck plating, servos whining against the gravitational distortion. The drone shells protecting Kex and Zara flickered with amber warning indicators. Chemical analysis showed increasing degradation of the protective barriers, eaten away by the corrosive waste processing environment. Beneath the shells, stress patterns spread through the children's crystalline forms like spiderwebs across glass. Gary checked the oxygen readout. 17 minutes of breathable atmosphere remained. The neural interface calculated their position relative to the emergency shelter pod, plotting a route that would consume nearly every molecule of their remaining supply. The maintenance bypass entrance came into view, partially blocked by twisted support struts. The gap measured 4 to 3 centimeters at its widest point, enough space for the children individually, but too narrow while secured to the protective harness. "Warning," the AI announced. "Structural integrity compromised. Additional collapses probable." Gary's gloved hands gripped the nearest strut. His neural interface activated emergency strength protocols, synthetic muscles straining against the warped metal. The support beam shifted slightly, widening the gap by precious centimeters. Blood vessels burst in his lungs as he pushed harder. The medical subroutines reported accelerating tissue damage throughout his cardiovascular system. Red warning indicators tracked the spread of internal bleeding. The strut groaned, bending outward. Gary quickly disconnected the harness, keeping the drone shells in place as he guided Kex through the opening. The child's crystalline surface pulsed with stress patterns, but held stable. Zara followed moments later, both children safely beyond the obstruction. Gary forced his body through the gap, metal edges scraping against his pressure suit. The neural interface screamed warnings about his deteriorating vital signs. The medical subroutines projected organ failure within 5 to 7 minutes. Atmospheric friction detected, the AI reported. Hull temperature rising in sectors 7 through 12. The ship's descent into the planetoid's thin atmosphere generated waves of heat through the outer hull. Temperature sensors near the emergency shelter pod tracked a dangerous upward trend, approaching critical limits for Iridian biology. A priority transmission cut through the neural static. Swift response to Gary Thompson. Emergency trajectory calculated. ETA reduced by 20 minutes. Be advised, debris field accelerating due to gravitational effects. Impact predicted in 38 minutes. They pressed forward through the bypass tunnel, Gary's boots clanking against maintenance grating. An automated repair depot appeared ahead, dormant drones hanging in their charging stations. He accessed the control systems using Marcus's maintenance codes, reprogramming the units for protective escort duty. Power indicators throughout the section dimmed as the drones activated, forming a defensive screen around the children. The additional barriers improved their survival probability by 23%, according to the neural interface's calculations. The bypass tunnel ended at a pressure-sealed doorway. Beyond it lay a relatively stable section of the ship, 15 minutes from the emergency shelter pod. Gary's legs buckled as he input the access code, his damaged organs struggling to maintain basic functions. The medical subroutines fought to keep him conscious, flooding his system with synthetic adrenaline and pain suppressors. The door cycled open, revealing their path forward. The neural interface displayed a countdown to complete physical failure, the numbers dropping steadily as Gary's body reached its limits. He focused on the next step, then the next, the children's lives depending on each meter gained. Through the neural link, Marcus's voice crackled, main power failing in engineering. You've got maybe 10 minutes before we lose artificial gravity in your sector. The artificial gravity fluctuated, warning indicators flashing across Gary's neural display as hairline fractures spread through the hull plating around them. His interface tracked the growing structural damage, projecting failure points expanding outward like crystalline formations. Hull integrity compromised in sections 18 through 24, the AI announced. Atmospheric friction generating critical stress patterns. Gary guided the children through the corridor, each step sending jolts of pain through his failing organs. The maintenance drones maintained their protective screen, sensors scanning continuously for environmental threats. His neural interface connected to the emergency shelter pod systems, running preliminary diagnostics. The results painted a grim picture. The pod's life support systems cycled erratically, atmospheric processors unable to maintain stable conditions. The interface calculated a 97% probability of fatal crystalline degradation if the children entered the pod before recalibration. A cargo container near the pod caught his attention. Gary transmitted commands to the maintenance drones, directing them to strip components from nearby systems. The drones worked with mechanical precision, harvesting atmospheric processors and power cells to construct a temporary safe haven. Warning, the AI intoned. Power reserves critical in maintenance units 2, 4, and 7. 3 drones went dark as they completed the modifications, their final energy reserves depleted. The remaining 2 units adjusted their protective field to compensate, though coverage decreased by 40%. The ship's rotation shifted violently. A support beam tore free above them with a metallic shriek. Gary tried to dodge but moved too slowly. The beam struck his left leg with crushing force. Pain exploded through his nervous system as the neural interface detected severe tissue damage and compound fractures. Medical subroutines activated emergency protocols, flooding his system with synthetic coagulants and pain blockers. The interface projected rapidly declining mobility stats, calculating that his injured leg could no longer support the children's weight. His gaze landed on an emergency equipment locker. Inside, a maintenance exoskeleton hung on charging brackets, its power cells glowing dimly. Gary accessed the release mechanism, exterior panels unfolding as the system activated. The neural interface flashed warnings as he connected to the exoskeleton's control systems. Using it would accelerate his body's deterioration, but the mechanical assistants offered their only chance of reaching the pod. Resonance vibrations shuddered through the ship's frame as Gary secured the children in the modified cargo container. The drone's sensors detected dangerous harmonic patterns building in the surrounding structure. Structural resonance approaching critical threshold, the AI reported. Hull breach predicted in 17 minutes. Gary transmitted new commands to the maintenance drones. Their power cells dimmed as they generated a localized dampening field, compensating for the worst vibrations. The neural interface calculated the field would hold for 12 minutes at current power levels. He limped toward the emergency shelter pod's outer chamber, exoskeleton servos whining with each step. The medical subroutines fought to maintain his consciousness as blood oxygen levels continued dropping. Red warning indicators tracked spreading tissue damage throughout his cardiovascular system. The pod's access panel opened, revealing environmental controls in need of manual recalibration. Gary's neural interface connected directly to the atmospheric processors, running Marcus's maintenance codes to access deeper system functions. Complex chemical formulae scrolled across his vision as the interface mapped the necessary adjustments for Iridian biology. His hands moved through the calibration sequence, fingers trembling as they manipulated virtual controls. The medical subroutines projected total organ failure in 28 minutes 7 minutes before the rescue vessel's scheduled arrival. The neural interface tracked multiple system failures cascading through his body. The exoskeleton's assistance strained his damaged heart, accelerating the spread of internal bleeding. Gary focused on the calibration data, knowing the children's survival depended on perfect atmospheric balance within the pod. Behind him, the dampening field flickered as the maintenance drone's power reserves approached critical levels. The ship's structural integrity continued deteriorating, twisted metal groaning under atmospheric friction. His neural display updated with new damage reports, counting down the minutes until complete systemic collapse threatened both the vessel and his failing body. Gary's neural interface connected to the pod's environmental control systems, streams of data flowing through his consciousness as he initiated the recalibration sequence. The interface detected a critical malfunction in the primary atmospheric processor. The vital component pulsed with error codes, its functionality degraded beyond safe operating parameters. Secondary atmospheric processor available, the AI reported. Manual activation required via external maintenance crawlspace. Temperature readings from the outer hull scrolled across his vision. 150 degrees Celsius and climbing as atmospheric friction intensified. The maintenance crawlspace would expose him to potentially lethal heat levels, even with his damaged pressure suit. A power surge rippled through the remaining drone systems. Their protective field flickered, energy reserves dropping toward critical levels. Gary diverted power from his neural interface's peripheral functions, sacrificing advanced system access and medical support to maintain the children's protection. Warning indicators faded from his vision as non-essential systems went dark. Power redistribution complete, the AI confirmed. Drone shield stabilized. Warning, medical support limited. Estimated survival time decreased by 4 to 2%. The exoskeleton's servos whined as Gary moved toward the maintenance access panel. Each step sent waves of agony through his damaged leg. The neural interface's remaining medical functions fought to keep him conscious, but blood oxygen levels continued falling as internal bleeding accelerated. Heat radiated through the access panel as Gary pulled it open. The crawlspace beyond glowed with thermal warnings, metal surfaces distorted by atmospheric friction. He dragged himself inside, pressure suit sensors detecting immediate surface damage from the extreme temperature. The backup processor's manual controls waited at the end of the cramped space. Gary's fingers found the activation sequence panel, temperature alerts screaming across his remaining neural readouts. The synchronization required precise timing. Too early or late would render the system unusable. Sweat evaporated instantly inside his suit as he input the commands. The processor's status lights shifted from red to amber, then green as the activation sequence engaged. Surface tissue damage warnings flashed at the edge of his consciousness. A violent shudder ran through the ship's frame. The pod's mounting brackets groaned, metal stretching beyond design tolerances. Gary pulled himself from the crawl space, exoskeleton servos straining as he moved to reinforce the failing supports. The two maintenance drones detected microscopic fractures spreading through Keck's and Zara's crystalline forms. Their temporary shelter wouldn't protect them much longer. Crystalline degradation accelerating, the AI announced. Structural failure imminent in protected environment. Emergency transfer required. Gary accessed the pod's transfer protocols, knowing the rushed procedure carried significant risks. The drone's sensors tracked the growing stress patterns in the children's bodies. Waiting wasn't an option. He directed the drones to begin moving essential life support components from his damaged exoskeleton to the pod systems. The neural interface projected a rapid cascade of organ failures approaching, but Gary focused on the transfer sequence. Each component had to be perfectly calibrated for Iridian biology. The ship's rotation intensified as the debris field approached. Hull plating buckled near the pod's moorings, threatening to tear the entire section free. Gary's hands moved through the final calibration steps as his heart struggled to maintain circulation. Keck's and Zara's temporary shelter began to fail, crystalline fractures widening under the intense environmental stress. The drones initiated emergency transfer protocols, guiding the children toward the recalibrated pod. Gary's vision blurred as he monitored the process, his damaged body reaching its absolute limits. The neural interface detected complete cardiovascular collapse approaching within minutes. Through the haze of system failures, Gary watched the transfer sequence progress. The children's lives depended on these final moments as the ship continued its fatal descent toward the planetoid's surface. A priority alert cut through his fatting consciousness. The debris field had accelerated beyond previous calculations. Impact would occur sooner than projected, leaving precious little time to complete the pod's preparations. The AI updated its countdown as Gary fought to finish the critical safety protocols, racing against both his body's deterioration and the approaching destruction. Gary's neural interface flashed collision trajectory updates as the debris field accelerated toward them. The temporary shelter housing Keck's and Zara flickered under the ship's intensifying rotation, crystalline fractures spreading across their delicate forms. He pulled himself toward the pod's external storage, servos grinding in his damaged exoskeleton. Inside, emergency hull panels and atmospheric seals waited. Gary's trembling hands assembled a crude transfer tunnel, connecting their temporary shelter to the pod's entry hatch. The neural interface projected structural diagrams as he worked, compensating for his fatting vision. Multiple hull breaches detected in adjacent sections, the AI announced. Atmospheric pressure declining. A secondary breach erupted nearby, the pressure wave slamming Gary against the tunnel's frame. His damaged leg buckled, forcing him to catch himself on the partially assembled structure. The neural interface automatically injected emergency stimulants, sending artificial clarity coursing through his system. Warning: stimulant administration reduces survival time to 4 minutes, the interface displayed. Gary sealed the new breach with emergency hull foam, watching the material expand and harden. The temperature readings from his suit sensors climbed steadily 180 degrees Celsius and rising. The two maintenance drones detached their power cells, integrating them into the tunnel's thermal shielding before going permanently dark. He accessed the pod's environmental controls through his neural link, fingers dancing across virtual interfaces. The oxygen recycling system flashed error messages. Its catalyst chamber sat empty, unable to process atmosphere suitable for Iridian biology. Gary studied the children's crystalline structure through failing medical sensors. Their unique molecular composition could catalyze the atmospheric conversion, but only through direct contact with the recycling unit's intake manifold. He reached inside the pod, reconfiguring internal support struts to position the intake where the children could maintain constant physical connection. His breath came in ragged gasps as the medical subroutines reported advancing respiratory failure. The neural interface diverted power from non-essential functions, maintaining only basic life support and pod control systems. Gary's manual oxygen mask hissed and sputtered, delivering an increasingly erratic supply. Structural integrity critical, the AI warned. Pod departure required in 11 minutes maximum. The interface projected a 7-minute window until total unconsciousness. Gary initiated the transfer sequence, creating a stable atmospheric pocket within the tunnel. His hands shook as he guided Kex toward the passage, monitoring crystal stress patterns through rapidly failing sensors. Atmospheric friction increasing, the AI updated. Hull temperature approaching critical threshold. Gary's vision dimmed at the edges as he moved Kex through the tunnel, maintaining precise environmental conditions despite his body's accelerating collapse. The child's crystalline form pulsed with internal fractures, requiring delicate adjustments to pressure and temperature at each step. Blood oxygen warnings flashed across his neural display. The interface calculated 5 minutes of consciousness, remaining barely enough time to transfer both children if every movement proved perfect. Gary positioned Kex against the recycling unit's intake, watching as the pod's atmospheric processors began stabilizing. He turned back for Zara, each step sending waves of agony through his failing organs. The stimulants could no longer mask the spreading tissue damage. His neural interface projected a cascade of system failures advancing through his body as he guided the second child toward apparent safety. The ship's rotation intensified, metal groaning around them as the debris field approached. Gary's fingers moved through emergency release sequences, preparing the pod for immediate departure while maintaining the delicate transfer process. His consciousness flickered, the neural interface fighting to keep him focused on the critical procedure. The AI's collision countdown continued its relentless advance as Gary worked to secure both children within the pod's recalibrated environment. His medical subroutines reported complete organ failure accelerating, giving him precious few minutes to complete the essential safety protocols before his body shut down entirely. Gary guided Zara's crystalline form through the reinforced tunnel, monitoring the cascade of error messages flooding his neural display. The transfer tunnel's thermal shielding crackled and warped as the hull temperature climbed past 195 degrees Celsius. Hairline fractures spread across the children's crystalline surfaces, poolsing with internal stress patterns that reflected the extreme conditions. The pod's backup atmospheric processor stuttered, struggling to maintain stability as Gary positioned Zara beside Kex near the oxygen recycling unit. His damaged leg gave way with a sharp crack of failing servos, sending him sprawling across the pod's deck plating. The neural interface diverted remaining blood flow from his extremities, but the internal bleeding continued spreading through his torso. Warning: debris field trajectory altered, the AI announced. Impact projected in 7 minutes. Rescue arrival window exceeded. Gary pulled himself toward the pod's primary control panel, leaving a trail of hydraulic fluid from his ruined exoskeleton. The mounting brackets screamed under increasing structural load. 3 of the 6 main supports had already twisted beyond their design limits. Status indicators across the panel flashed urgent warnings as he initiated the first safety protocol. The neural interface lost its connection to the ship's medical systems, cutting off his vital sign monitoring. Gary's hands trembled as he dragged himself to the secondary control station, fighting against the spreading numbness in his limbs. The pod's pre-launch sequence demanded activation from 4 separate positions, a safety measure that now threatened to doom them all. Kex and Zara's crystalline forms hummed in resonance with the recycling unit's intake manifold. The catalyst reaction had begun, but the pod's atmosphere needed additional processing time before it could sustain Iridian life. Gary's vision narrowed to a dark tunnel as he reached for the third safety control. Hull breach detected in Section 7, the AI reported. Orbital decay accelerating. Debris field exposure now critical. The largest debris clusters loomed directly in the pod's launch trajectory. Gary crawled toward the external guidance controls, knowing he had to cross the superheated maintenance crawlspace one final time. The neural interface's emergency power reserves failed, plunging him into darkness as the last medical support systems went offline. Heat radiated through his pressure suit as he entered the crawlspace. The thermal shielding bubbled and peeled away, exposing him to temperatures that seared through the remaining protection. Gary's fingers found the guidance controls through muscle memory alone, adjusting the pod's planned ejection vector degree by agonizing degree. The ship's frame groaned as its deteriorating orbit pulled them deeper into the debris field's path. Gary's consciousness flickered as he input the final trajectory corrections. The AI's countdown continued, 4 minutes until the vessel's structural integrity failed completely. The pod's pre-launch sequence still required 3 minutes to complete its essential safety checks. He pulled himself back through the crawlspace, pressure suit sensors no longer registering the extreme heat. His body had begun shutting down, nerve endings dying as his organs failed one by one. The manual override controls waited on the far side of the pod, chamber his last task before the children could reach safety. The distance seemed to stretch impossibly as Gary dragged himself across the deck plates. His exoskeleton sparked and seized, the servos finally giving out under the accumulated damage. Each movement brought him closer to the override panel, but his remaining strength ebbed with every passing second. Structural collapse imminent, the AI warned. Pod launch window closing. 3 minutes remaining. The override controls blurred before Gary's eyes as he reached for the emergency activation sequence. The children's crystalline forms pulsed with increasingly stable patterns as the pod's atmosphere approached viable levels. Their survival depended on these final moments as the ship continued its fatal plunge toward destruction, toward their pod bay. Gary's fingers slipped from the final control sequence as the neural interface flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. Without medical support or ship systems access, his world narrowed to pure mechanical motion, each excruciating movement guided by years of Merchant Marine Corps training burned into muscle memory. The pod's mounting brackets shrieked as another support failed. Through the haze of advancing organ failure, Gary counted only 2 intact brackets remaining. The ship's AI's voice crackled through emergency speakers. Complete structural failure in 2 minutes, 4 to 7 seconds. Gary pulled himself across the superheated maintenance crawlspace, pressure suit sensors long since destroyed by the extreme temperatures. His exposed skin blistered and charred where gaps in the suit's protection left him vulnerable. The guidance controls waited ahead, their surfaces glowing dull red in the intensifying heat. His partially melted gloves stuck to the control panel as he input the critical trajectory calculations. Each keystroke sent fresh waves of agony through his burning hands, but the numbers flowed automatically. Emergency orbital mechanics drilled into him through countless training simulations. The new course would drain additional fuel reserves, but provided the only viable path through the approaching debris field. A warning tone pierced the air. The pod's internal sensors detected atmosphere venting through a damaged seal, threatening the delicate balance required for Iridian survival. Gary's gaze darted between the guidance controls and the pod's main hatch. The trajectory calculations remained incomplete, but every second of venting atmosphere brought the children closer to cellular breakdown. He abandoned the controls, dragging himself back toward the pod. His left leg trailed uselessly behind him, internal bleeding spreading through his torso with each movement. The ship's hull groaned as debris impacts intensified across the outer plating. Total hull breach imminent in adjacent sections, the AI updated. The airlock chamber's emergency lighting cast sharp shadows as Gary accessed the repair kit. His burned hands fumbled with the sealant applicator, skin cracking and peeling as he manipulated the tools. The children's crystalline forms pulsed with increasing instability, their molecular structures showing signs of environmental stress. Warning: debris field leading edge impact detected. Cascade damage spreading through forward sections. The sealant emerged in uneven strips as Gary's trembling hands worked to patch the damaged section. Each breath brought less oxygen to his failing organs. The final manual launch authorization panel waited on the far wall, but leaving the partially repaired seal risked atmospheric contamination. Metal screamed as another mounting bracket failed. The AI's voice cut through the chaos. Vessel structural integrity critical. Complete destruction projected in 1 minute, 52 seconds. The debris field's main body loomed in the external cameras, a wall of twisted metal and rock bearing down on their position. Gary pressed the final strip of sealant into place, watching the atmospheric sensors for signs of stabilization. The children's crystalline resonance patterns began steadying, but the launch clock continued its relentless countdown. With the last reserves of his strength, Gary reached for the authorization panel. His vision narrowed to a single point of light as consciousness threatened to slip away entirely. The ship's rotation intensified, sending waves of nausea through his battered body as a new series of impacts rocked the hull. Primary structure failing, the AI announced. Debris field main body impact in 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Gary's blood-slicked fingers moved across the authorization controls. The pod's launch sequence awaited final confirmation, while the vessel continued its fatal dance with the approaching debris. Each passing second brought them closer to total destruction, but the atmospheric seal required additional curing time before it could withstand the stresses of emergency launch. The navigation display showed the debris field's position updating with terrifying speed. Gary monitored the seal's integrity readings, watching the crucial numbers climb toward minimum safety threshold. The children's lives balanced on the razor's edge between atmospheric stability and the approaching devastation. Their crystalline forms continued processing oxygen through the recycling unit as the ship's superstructure crumbled around them. Gary's trembling hands reached for the emergency hull foam dispenser integrated into his damaged suit. The viscous sealant oozed across the compromised section, expanding rapidly as it contacted the pod's atmosphere. His vision blurred as the last functional organs in his body began shutting down, but he forced himself to maintain pressure until the foam solidified. The atmospheric sensors stabilized, showing acceptable levels for Iridian survival. Gary's legs buckled completely as his spinal control interface failed. He dragged himself toward the pod's wall compartment, leaving dark streaks of hydraulic fluid and blood across the deck plating. Total structural collapse in 90 seconds, the AI announced as fresh impacts rattled the hull. The emergency medical kits panel sparked when Gary wrenched it open. His burned fingers fumbled with the delivery system's controls, reconfiguring the chemical synthesizer to produce a protective barrier compatible with crystalline life forms. The children's resonance patterns fluctuated as he adjusted the compound ratios, their surfaces catching the emergency lighting in prismatic waves. Power core containment failing, the AI updated. Warning: uncontrolled reaction cascade detected. The modified medical spray enveloped Kex and Zara in a translucent film, their crystalline structures stabilizing as the biochemical barrier took effect. Gary's arms gave out as he activated the launch authorization sequence. The console's display swam before his eyes, but his fingers remembered the complex code from countless drills. Metal screamed as the final mounting bracket began to tear free. The ship's rotation pulled at Gary's failing body, artificial gravity fluctuating wildly as the vessel's systems continued to deteriorate. The pod's launch preparation sequence initiated, but a flashing warning indicated the outer hatch remained unsealed. Vessel power core detonation imminent. Complete structural failure in 60 seconds. Gary's elbows scraped against the deck plating as he pulled himself toward the hatch. The automatic sealing mechanism's status light remained dark, another victim of the cascading power failures throughout the ship. His consciousness faded with each movement, but the sound of the children's crystalline forms humming in stable resonance drove him forward. The external release lever gleamed dully beyond the hatch opening. Gary's ruined pressure suit sensors sparked and died as he forced his body through the gap. Superheated air rushed past him, the near-vacuum conditions pulling at his exposed flesh. The ship's hull groaned as debris impacts intensified across its surface. Warning: power core critical. Detonation in 40 seconds. Debris field main body impact imminent. The release lever waited just beyond his reach. Gary braced his arms against the pod's frame, fighting against the violent rotation that threatened to tear him free. The children's biochemical barrier pulsed with a steady glow through the hatch opening as he stretched toward humanity's last hope for diplomatic contact with the Iridian species. Final warning: complete vessel destruction in 20 seconds. Immediate pod launch required for survival. Gary's burned fingers closed around the release lever as the ship began its final death throes. The debris field's leading edge tore through the vessel's outer hull, sending shockwaves through the disintegrating structure. He pulled the lever down with the last fragments of his strength, watching the hatch slide closed on its manual tracks. The pod's launch indicators turned green as its systems registered proper seal confirmation. Through the small observation port, Gary saw the children's crystalline forms secure in their protective barrier as the ejection sequence began. The ship's power core warnings reached fever pitch as the pod's clamps released, leaving Gary exposed to the vacuum of space and the approaching wall of debris. Debris hurtling toward them. His trembling fingers released the lever as the massive steel door began its hydraulic descent. The ship lurched violently, nearly pulling him back from the hatch. Gary pushed against the frame, propelling his broken body away from the pod's entrance. The door needed a clear path to seal one final task his failing muscles had to complete. The AI's voice crackled through dying speakers. Complete vessel destruction in 15 seconds. Vacuum pulled at Gary's exposed flesh as he drifted away from the pod. The debris field's leading edge tore through the hull above, unleashing a storm of superheated metal fragments. His body rotated slowly in the zero-gravity environment, giving him a clear view as several jagged pieces of plating careened toward the pod's guidance array. The fragments struck his pressure suit instead, tearing through the already compromised material and embedding themselves in his chest and shoulder. The pod's stabilization thrusters fired in rapid sequence, their blue exhaust illuminating the chamber as the final mounting brackets gave way with twin metallic screams. The precise bursts kept the vessel steady while its launch systems completed their final checks. Gary's neural interface recorded his critical signs plummeting as vacuum exposure accelerated his organ failure. Through darkening vision, he watched the hatch seal click into place with a pneumatic hiss. Energy surged through the ship's dying systems as the power core entered its terminal cascade. The sudden power spike reached the pod's ejection mechanisms just as they activated. The launch rails glowed brilliant white, electromagnetic forces hurling the pod clear of the disintegrating vessel with far greater velocity than its designers had intended. Gary's pressure suit sensors transmitted their final data, burst temperature readings, acceleration forces, and radiation levels that would help engineers improve future emergency systems. His neural interface captured the exact moment his heart ceased beating, recording invaluable data about human physiology under extreme conditions. The pod streaked away from the ship, its carefully calculated trajectory threading between approaching debris clusters. Inside, Keck's and Zara's crystalline forms pulsed with steady blue light as the oxygen recycling system maintained optimal atmospheric conditions. The biochemical barrier Gary had created continued protecting their delicate structures from launch stresses, its translucent surface refracting emergency lighting in complex patterns. Through the observation port, the swift response rescue vessel appeared as a distant silver needle, adjusting its course to intercept. Its engines flared as it executed a series of tight maneuvers, weaving between debris fragments while maintaining its pursuit vector. The expanding field of wreckage forced the ship into an increasingly complex dance of avoidance and course correction. Gary's body drifted amid the destruction, the temperature of his pressure suit dropping rapidly in the vacuum of space. The ship's power core reached critical mass behind him, energy readings spiking beyond measurable levels. The pod's sensors detected the rescue vessel's approach even as they registered the beginning of the catastrophic chain reaction that would tear the dying ship apart. The swift response transmitted an encrypted burst of data, confirming acquisition of the pod's emergency beacon. Its thrusters fired continuously now, the ship's computer calculating and recalculating safe passages through the debris field as the situation grew more chaotic. The expanding cloud of wreckage threatened to cut off their approach vector entirely, forcing the rescue vessel to push its engines to their operational limits. The pod's internal systems maintained their delicate balance, protecting their precious cargo as they raced away from the impending explosion. Keck's and Zara's crystalline bodies continued their steady oxygen exchange, safely cocooned in the protective barrier of Gary's final gift to them. The swift response grew larger in the pod's rear sensors, but the deadly wall of debris expanded even faster, threatening to engulf both vessels in its lethal embrace. The swift response appeared as a silver needle threading through the chaos, its engines pulsing with precision as Captain James Morrison guided the vessel through the expanding field of destruction. His weathered hands moved across the manual controls with practiced efficiency, overriding the standard navigation protocols to execute a series of tight maneuvers between approaching debris clusters. Extending forward shields to maximum, the ship's engineer reported through the command channel. Power distribution optimized for debris deflection. The rescue vessel's enhanced barrier system flared brilliant blue as fragments of hull plating bounced off its surface. Captain Morrison tracked the pod's trajectory on his tactical display, watching as Gary's final calculations kept the small vessel on a stable course despite the turbulent conditions surrounding it. In the medical bay, Dr. Sarah Simpson calibrated the specialized stasis chambers, her movements precise as she adjusted environmental controls to match the data streaming from the pod's sensors. The crystalline life form readings displayed across her medical console, showing stable oxygen exchange patterns within the biochemical barrier. Atmospheric synthesis complete, she announced, checking the compound ratios. Ready to receive Iridian survivors. The ship's computer projected an overlay of approaching debris vectors across the main viewport. Morrison adjusted their approach angle, compensating for a sudden shift in the wreckage pattern. The vessel's shield generators whined as their power draw increased, creating a protective wake that extended behind their position. Launching recovery drones, the tactical officer announced. The specialized units deployed from their launch tubes, forming a defensive screen around the pod's position. Their combined shield generators created an additional layer of protection as the swift response closed the final distance. The ship's sensors registered Gary's drifting form, his pressure suit systems dark but his neural interface still intact. Additional debris impacts struck his body, adding to the collection of fragments already embedded in his chest and shoulders. The tactical display highlighted each piece of wreckage. He had inadvertently intercepted 23 impacts that would have critically damaged the pod's vital systems. Engineering, prepare for atmospheric containment field extension, Morrison ordered, watching the pod's fuel reserves tick down past 15%. Divert power from non-essential systems. The cargo bay's protective field stretched outward, creating a corridor of breathable atmosphere. Warning indicators flashed across multiple stations as shield strength decreased, leaving the vessel more vulnerable to the approaching shockwave. Long-range sensors detecting debris cascade effect, the science officer reported. Planetoid's gravity well is causing larger pieces to fragment. Impact with our position projected in 7 minutes. The pod's guidance thrusters fired in short bursts, maintaining its course as it entered the extended containment field's range. Inside, Keck's and Zara's crystalline forms continued their steady oxygen exchange, safely cocooned within Gary's final gift to them. Captain Morrison's hands moved across the navigation controls, executing the final approach maneuver. The swift response rotated precisely, aligning its cargo bay with the pod's trajectory. The vessel's shield arrays strained under multiple impacts as the debris field intensified around them. Containment field stable, engineering reported. Ready for pod retrieval in 10 seconds. The shockwave from the ship's destroyed power core expanded outward, pushing a wall of superheated plasma and debris toward their position. The tactical display updated with new velocity readings that exceeded the pod's maximum thrust capabilities. Multiple alert indicators activated across the bridge as the cloud of lethal fragments from the planetoid's gravity effect continued its approach from the opposite vector. The swift responses, cargo bay open to space, its atmospheric containment field shimmering as it prepared to receive the emergency shelter pod. Captain Morrison watched the distance markers count down, knowing their window for safe retrieval narrowed with each passing second. The distance markers reached critical threshold as Morrison executed the final approach vector. Warning indicators flashed across his command console as Chief Engineer Robert Torr's voice cut through the bridge speakers. Captain, containment field generators showing dangerous power fluctuations. Field stability at 63% and dropping. Morrison's fingers danced across the manual controls. Implement Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha. Strip power from all non-essential systems. Aye, sir. Disengaging auxiliary sensors, reducing shield matrix to minimum sustainable levels. The ship's lighting dimmed as power redirected to the containment field. Multiple impacts rattled the vessel's hull, each strike reverberating through the weakened defensive screens. Engineering readouts showed structural stress indicators climbing into yellow warning zones across multiple sections. The pod crossed into the outer edge of the containment field, its trajectory maintaining the precise course Gary had calculated. A sudden flash of sparks erupted from its port stabilizer array. The pod began spinning, its rotation accelerating as damaged thrusters fired erratically. Recovery drones engaging tractor beams, Lieutenant Hayes reported from Tactical, attempting to arrest rotation. The drones moved in perfect synchronization, their energy fields connecting with the pod's hull. The spin slowed, then stopped as their combined tractor beams stabilized the vessel. Dr. Simpson's voice carried urgency through the medical channel. Captain, detecting degradation in the Iridian's atmospheric readings. The biochemical barrier is breaking down at an accelerating rate. Time estimate, 3 minutes before critical exposure risk. We need that pod secured now. Morrison checked the tactical display. The debris cloud expanded toward their position, its leading edge already beginning to scatter recovery drone sensors. Behind them, the shockwave from the destroyed vessel pushed another wall of lethal fragments in their direction. "Lieutenant Hayes, find us a way out." Hayes' hands flew across his console. "Possible escape corridor identified, sir. Will require close pass to the planetoid's atmospheric boundary. Gravitational distortion readings in the yellow." A metallic clang echoed through the hull as Gary's drifting form collided with Recovery Drone 3. The drone's tractor beam flickered, momentarily releasing its grip on the pod. Emergency stabilizers on the remaining units compensated, but the additional strain sent power consumption readings spiking dangerously high. "Sir," Hayes said, "Gary's neural interface is still intact. Data signature shows active recording status." Morrison weighed the options, watching precious seconds tick away. "Deploy RD-7. Recover the body and interface." The backup drone detached from its storage rack, its older systems taking precious moments to initialize. Engineering alerts blared as TORS fought to maintain power distribution between the recovery operation and critical ship functions. "Cycling emergency power reserves," TORS reported. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before complete system failure." A massive debris impact struck the port hull, sending shuddering vibrations through the entire vessel. The containment field fluctuated, its protective barrier wavering as power surged through overtaxed generators. The pod drifted sideways, slipping from the recovery corridor's center. The primary recovery drones immediately adjusted their formation, creating an overlapping shield matrix around the pod. Their combined barriers held back the vacuum as the containment field stabilized, but TOR's voice carried strain as he reported, "Field generators at critical capacity. Cannot sustain current power draw." RD-7 reached Gary's body, its grappling arms extending to secure the remains. The drone's sensors confirmed neural interface integrity as it began its careful retrieval maneuver. The swift response shuddered as Morrison initiated the final recovery sequence. Hull stress indicators flashed red across multiple sections as the planetoid's gravitational field pulled at their position. The debris cloud loomed closer, its deadly contents threatening to overwhelm their weakened defenses. "Cargo bay atmospheric seals engaged," TORS reported. "Beginning final retrieval phase." The recovery drones guided the pod toward the open bay, their combined shield matrix maintaining protection as the containment field continued to fluctuate. RD-7 followed close behind, Gary's body secured in its mechanical grip as emergency power reserves dropped toward complete depletion. Morrison watched the final distance markers tick down as the pod crossed the cargo bay threshold. The recovery drones maintained their protective matrix, compensating for each fluctuation in the failing containment field. "Containment field collapse imminent," TORS called through the command channel. His hands flew across engineering controls, bypassing safety interlocks. "Initiating emergency power shunt from auxiliary reactors." Raw energy surged through the ship's power conduits. Warning klaxons blared as the auxiliary reactors exceeded design parameters. The containment field stabilized momentarily, its blue shimmer steadying as TOR's desperate measure took effect. Field holding at 30%, auxiliary reactors showing critical thermal buildup. The pod settled onto the cargo bay deck with a metallic thud. Recovery drones adjusted their positions, maintaining their protective barrier as Dr. Simpson's medical team rushed forward with portable atmospheric processors. Their sensor readings showed Keck's and Zara's crystalline forms maintaining oxygen exchange, though microfractures had begun forming along their outer layers. RD-7 pushed through the weakening containment field, Gary's body secured in its manipulator arms. The drone's port stabilizer sparked and failed, sending it into an uncontrolled spin. It struck the deck hard, skidding across the bay floor. The drone's frame absorbed the impact, protecting its precious cargo as emergency crews converged on its position. Containment field failing. Tor's voice carried urgency. Complete collapse in 10 seconds. Morrison engaged emergency thrusters, the ship's hull groaning as it accelerated away from the approaching debris cloud. All hands, secure for immediate departure. The cargo bay's atmospheric barriers slammed shut just as the containment field dissolved. Impact warnings flashed across tactical displays as debris fragments struck their weakened shields. Power readings dropped into critical ranges across multiple systems. Shields at 12%, Hayes reported, his fingers dancing across the tactical console. Detecting electromagnetic interference from the planetoid. Navigation computers showing signal degradation. Dr. Simpson knelt beside the emergency pod, connecting specialized support units to the external ports Gary had modified. The pod systems resisted standard interface protocols, forcing her team to adapt their equipment on the fly. "Tors, I need stable power to these life support modifications," she called through the medical channel. Gary reconfigured the entire atmospheric matrix. Standard connections aren't compatible. In engineering, Tors diverted personnel from failing systems to address the crisis. Routing emergency backup power to medical. Be advised auxiliary reactors are going critical. 10 minutes until complete shutdown. The ship lurched as Morrison executed emergency evasive maneuvers. Debris impacts rattled through the hull as their degraded shields struggled to deflect incoming fragments. The planetoid's electromagnetic pulses intensified, causing navigation displays to flicker and distort. "Shifting to mechanical backup systems," Morrison announced, disengaging the primary guidance computers. The ship's AI projected possible escape vectors based on analog sensor data, highlighting a narrow corridor through the approaching wall of wreckage. Dr. Simpson's medical scanners mapped the intricate modifications Gary had made to the pod's life support systems. The data showed impossibly precise calibrations, environmental adjustments that pushed far beyond standard operational limits. Her attention shifted to Gary's neural interface as its storage banks synchronized with her medical computer. "Captain, you need to see this," she transmitted, watching the biometric data scroll across her screen. Gary's neural interface recorded everything. His body, it shouldn't have been possible for him to function under those conditions. The ship shuddered as Morrison pushed the engines harder, racing toward their rapidly closing escape window. Hull stress indicators climbed into critical ranges. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically as microfractures began forming along the outer plating. "Diverting all remaining power to forward shields," Hayes announced. Multiple compartments went dark as non-essential systems shut down. Structural integrity failing in sections 3 through 7. Tor's voice cut through the chaos. Auxiliary reactor cascade failure initiating. Primary power grid showing severe instability. The debris field intensified around them, filling every sensor display with deadly obstacles. Morrison guided the ship through the chaos using only mechanical backups, each course adjustment bringing them closer to either salvation or destruction. Behind them, the shockwave continued its inexorable approach, while ahead, the planetoid's electromagnetic interference grew stronger with each passing second. A titanic piece of hull plating cartwheeled through space, slamming into the starboard engine housing. The impact sent shockwaves through the swift response's frame as thrust readings plummeted. "Starboard engine at 6 to 7% capacity," Hayes called out, adjusting power distribution across the remaining functional systems. Port-side atmospheric processors showing critical damage from debris penetration. Morrison tracked their trajectory on mechanical backup displays, hands steady on the manual controls as he guided them through the narrowing corridor of safety. The planetoid's electromagnetic interference created ghostly distortions across every operational screen. In engineering, Tors bypassed another failing circuit, sweat beading on his forehead as he rerouted critical power flows. Auxiliary systems entering final breakdown sequence. 7 minutes until complete failure. Evacuate all non-essential areas, Morrison ordered through the ship-wide channel. Concentrate crew in critical operations sections only. Dr. Simpson's voice cut through the medical frequency. Captain, detecting accelerated breakdown in the biochemical barrier. Initiating emergency transfer to ship stasis chambers. Her medical team worked with practiced efficiency, connecting specialized equipment to the pod's modified ports. The neural interface data from Gary's final moments streamed across their diagnostic displays, revealing the intricate calculations behind his atmospheric modifications. "These readings can't be right," one of her technicians said, checking the efficiency metrics. The atmospheric processors are operating 4 to 3% above maximum specifications. Gary's interface data confirms it, Simpson replied, studying the complex formulas scrolling past. He discovered new configuration methods we've never seen before. "Tors, are you seeing this?" "Affirmative. Implementing similar modifications to ship-wide life support now. It's the only way we'll maintain proper conditions for your passengers." The ship lurched as another impact struck their weakened shields. Hayes monitored the tactical displays, watching in growing concern as the debris field began to change. "Captain, electromagnetic resonance is causing larger debris sections to fragment, detecting multiple shrapnel clouds forming ahead. We have 5 minutes before navigation becomes impossible." Morrison adjusted their course, threading the needle between two expanding clouds of deadly fragments. The ship's hull groaned under the increasing structural stress. In Medical Bay, Simpson's scanners revealed worrying patterns in their Iridian passengers' crystalline structures. Microscopic fractures spread through the outer layers in branching networks. "Preparing modified regeneration protocol," she announced, calibrating the treatment parameters based on Gary's recorded data. "Implementing human tissue restoration techniques adapted for crystalline matrices." A secondary coupling in the main reactor failed with a thunderous crack. Emergency lighting flickered as Tors fought to maintain power distribution through the remaining circuits. "Rerouting through tertiary backups," he reported. "Systems are redlining across the board." Recovery, Drone 7's damaged memory core transmitted its final sensor logs to the bridge computers. The visual feed showed Gary's last moments in stark detail, his body deliberately positioned to shield the pod's vulnerable sections, protecting it from 17 lethal impacts. The ship's frame shuddered as Morrison executed another evasive maneuver. Ahead, the debris field grew denser, fragments splitting into smaller pieces as the electromagnetic resonance intensified. Behind them, the massive shockwave continued its relentless advance. "Maintaining current course," Morrison announced. "Hayes, give me everything you can from those forward shields." Simpson's team worked rapidly to stabilize the atmospheric conditions within the stasis chambers. The specialized equipment hummed as it generated the precise gaseous mixture Gary's modifications had achieved. "Beginning final transfer sequence," Simpson reported. "Tors, we need stable power to complete the process. Routing emergency reserves to Medical Bay. Be advised we're running on fumes here." The swift response pushed forward through the chaos, her weakened engines straining against the increasing gravitational distortions. Each impact against their failing shields sent tremors through the overtaxed hull as Morrison searched for their path to survival. Safety. Warning indicators flashed across multiple displays as the primary reactor's containment field fluctuated dangerously. "Tors to bridge, initiating emergency power cycling procedures." The engineer's voice crackled through static-filled channels. Reactor containment approaching critical threshold. Morrison watched as systems began shutting down sequentially, the ship's lighting dimmed to emergency levels as Tors executed his desperate measure. Power levels dropped steadily 80%, 65%, 52% each decrease accompanied by the shutdown of non-critical systems. Power stabilizing at 45% capacity, TORS reported. Containment field holding. We've avoided a core breach, but we're running on minimal output. In Medical Bay, Dr. Simpson's team worked with practiced efficiency, transferring their Iridian passengers to the ship's modified stasis chambers. Her scanners revealed an expanding network of microfractures throughout the children's crystalline forms. Initiating compound synthesis, Simpson announced, studying the complex formulas extracted from Gary's neural interface. Beginning application now. The protective substance flowed through specialized delivery tubes, coating Keck's and Zara's crystalline surfaces. Simpson's monitors showed immediate results as the compound began sealing the microscopic damage. A violent impact rocked the ship, throwing crew members against bulkheads. Hayes' tactical display showed multiple hull breaches along the port side. Port hull integrity at 31%, he called out. 6 compartments compromised. Emergency bulkheads engaging. Morrison engaged manual controls as the ship's primary navigation systems flickered. Engineering, route all available power to forward shields. Maintain minimal life support in critical sections only. Hayes studied the tactical data streaming from Gary's neural interface, his eyes widening as patterns emerged in the debris field's movement. Captain, I'm seeing predictable fragmentation sequences, adjusting course to follow optimal path. The swift response banked hard, following Hayes' plotted trajectory. Smaller debris fragments bounced off their reinforced forward shields, while larger masses split apart in their wake, following the exact patterns Gary's data had predicted. Medical Bay to bridge, Simpson's voice carried urgency. Captain, Gary's neural interface contains encrypted Iridian biological data. Implementation of new treatment protocols showing positive results. A massive power surge blazed through the starboard distribution grid. Circuit breakers exploded in cascading chains as TORS fought to contain the cascade failure. Shutting down starboard power grid, TORS transmitted. Rerouting critical systems through remaining operational circuits. Doctor, you'll see fluctuations in stasis chamber power compensate immediately. Simpson's team scrambled to adjust power flows as the stasis chamber's energy levels wavered. The specialized atmospheric mixture Gary had designed began destabilizing as environmental controls fluctuated. Maintaining stable conditions, Simpson reported, her fingers flying across control surfaces. Implementing power conservation measures based on Gary's modifications. The ship's AI projected new navigational hazards across mechanical backup displays. Electromagnetic interference increased exponentially, creating ghost images across every operational screen. Morrison relied on Gary's suggested mechanical systems, guiding the vessel through increasingly treacherous space. Long-range sensors detecting approaching vessels, Hayes announced. Rescue fleet responding to our beacon. Estimated arrival 47 minutes. Morrison studied their deteriorating situation. The swift response shuddered as another debris impact struck their weakened hull. Damage reports flooded in from multiple sections as the ship's automated repair systems struggled to keep pace. Engineering, status of remaining power systems. Operating at minimal sustainable levels, TORS responded. Implementing emergency bypass procedures to maintain stasis chamber stability. Every system we have left is running far beyond safety margins. The electromagnetic interference intensified, creating cascading errors through their navigation computers. Morrison watched as primary guidance systems failed completely, leaving them dependent on the mechanical backups Gary's data had recommended. Entering densest section of debris field, Hayes reported, tracking the fragmentation patterns. Mechanical systems providing limited maneuverability. We'll have to time our movements precisely. The swift response pushed forward through the chaos, her damaged systems straining against the increasing pressures. Each successful evasive maneuver brought them closer to safety, but the ship's declining condition made every passing moment more precarious. Medical Bay to engineering neural interface data showing additional power optimization protocols. Simpson transmitted. Implementing them now. TORS, standby for efficiency improvements in life support systems. The ship's remaining operational systems adjusted automatically as Gary's final gift to his crew continued providing crucial insights. New warning indicators flashed across every station as they pressed onward, searching for a path through the deadly field of fragmenting debris. The ship's primary power grid fluctuated wildly as another cascade of failures rippled through the distribution network. Engine readings dropped sharply, the numbers on Morrison's display falling to 34% capacity. Multiple impacts detected on starboard propulsion housing, Hayes reported, his fingers dancing across the tactical console. Debris penetration in sections 7 through 12, implementing emergency containment protocols. Tor's voice crackled through the command channel, distorted by increasing electromagnetic interference. Captain, emergency power routing systems showing critical strain patterns. Estimate 15 minutes until complete life support failure. Doctor. Simpson's medical sensors registered an unexpected energy signature emanating from the stasis chambers. The crystalline structures of both Iridian children pulsed with a distinct resonance pattern that interfered with nearby electrical systems. Bridge, we're detecting unique energy emissions from Kex and Zara, Simpson transmitted, cross-referencing with Gary's neural interface data. Captain, you need to see this. The interface data streamed to Morrison's station, revealing complex calculations and detailed observations Gary had recorded during his final modifications to the emergency shelter pod. The formulas described precise methods for harnessing crystalline resonance patterns to enhance power distribution efficiency. TORS, implement Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha, Morrison ordered. Route power distribution through Medical Bay. Use the stasis chambers as amplification nodes. The engineering team worked rapidly to reconfigure their failing power grid. Auxiliary displays showed a 27% increase in available power as the crystalline resonance patterns integrated with their electrical systems. Power stability fluctuating with debris impacts, TORS reported. Maintaining manual adjustments to compensate. We're pushing everything well beyond safety margins. New hull breach warnings flashed across Hayes's tactical display. Sections 7 through 12 compromised. Emergency bulkheads engaging. We're losing functional space fast. Implementing rolling blackouts in non-critical areas, TORS announced. Redirecting power to maintain stasis chamber stability. Simpson's medical team decoded additional encrypted segments of Gary's research data, revealing crucial information about crystalline life forms' natural energy field manipulation abilities. They integrated these findings into the ship's medical systems, creating a symbiotic relationship between the stasis chambers and the vessel's power grid. Medical Bay to engineering establishing feedback loop between stasis units and main power distribution, Simpson transmitted. Crystalline resonance patterns are helping stabilize our systems. The rescue fleet's transmission cut through their emergency channel. Swift response, this is Recovery Fleet Alpha, encountering severe electromagnetic interference. New estimated arrival time, 7 to 2 minutes. Morrison exchanged glances with Hayes. Their current system degradation gave them less than 50 minutes of operational capability. The ship's AI highlighted a potential safe zone beyond the debris field, but reaching it required navigating through intense electromagnetic disturbances. We need 4 to 3% engine capacity to achieve escape velocity, Hayes calculated. Current output is insufficient. Torres studied the crystalline resonance data from Gary's interface. Captain, requesting permission to implement emergency engine modifications. We can route power through circuits adjacent to the stasis chambers, using the children's resonance patterns as natural amplifiers. Doctor, Morrison queried. The modification will place additional stress on their crystalline structures, Simpson replied, adjusting the protective compound's concentration. I can compensate with increased compound saturation, but we're approaching dangerous levels. Proceed with the modifications, Morrison ordered. Doctor, maintain continuous monitoring of their condition. TORS, begin power routing sequence. The swift responses systems hummed with new energy as TOR's team established the specialized power circuits. Engine capacity climbed steadily as the crystalline resonance patterns merged with their propulsion systems. 40% engine capacity achieved, Hayes reported. 41. 42. Warning indicators flashed across Simpson's medical displays as stress fractures appeared in the children's outer crystalline layers. She adjusted the protective compound's flow rate, watching as the specialized solution worked to counteract the damage. The ship's hull groaned under increasing structural pressure as Morrison prepared for their desperate escape maneuver. Ahead, the electromagnetic interference created a shifting maze of distorted sensor readings and deadly debris. A blinding surge of energy coursed through the swift response's power grid as TORS activated the crystalline resonance amplification system. The ship's engines roared to life with renewed vigor, power readings climbing rapidly past previous limitations. Engine capacity at 52%, Hayes called out, his eyes fixed on the fluctuating readings. Resonance patterns successfully integrated with main power systems. The deck plates vibrated beneath their feet as structural integrity warnings flashed across multiple stations. Morrison gripped his command chair as the ship's frame groaned under the increased strain. Hull sections 20 through 25 reporting critical stress levels, Hayes transmitted. Structural supports showing signs of imminent failure. In Medical Bay, Dr. Simpson's monitors displayed alarming changes in their Iridian passengers' crystalline structures. Fracture patterns spread across their outer layers like spiderwebs through glass. Increasing compound concentration by 40%, Simpson announced, adjusting the atmospheric controls. Saturation levels approaching maximum safe threshold. A thunderous crack echoed through the ship as power surges overwhelmed the distribution network. Sparks erupted from 3 primary nodes, sending cascading failures through the port side systems. Port power grid failing, TORS transmitted, his voice tight with concentration. Implementing emergency bypass through secondary circuits. Captain, we've lost atmospheric containment in sections 13 and 14. Morrison watched as more red warning indicators spread across his command display. Status of the resonance amplification system. Maintaining stable energy flow, TORS responded. Analyzing Gary's interface data now. Implementing modified distribution algorithms to reduce stress on the crystalline matrices. The ship's AI projected a new alert across their primary screens. The reactor containment system showed signs of accelerating deterioration. TOR's calculations appeared alongside the warning. 27 minutes until total containment failure unless they reduced power consumption dramatically. Captain, Hayes interrupted, highlighting a narrow corridor through the debris field. I've identified a potential shortcut. Could save us 15 minutes of exposure time, but we'll need to maintain current power levels to navigate it successfully. Simpson's voice cut through the command channel. Medical Bay to bridge. The protective compound is losing effectiveness. Microfractures are developing faster than we can repair them. Their core matrices are showing signs of destabilization. The ship shuddered as another debris impact struck their weakened hull. Morrison studied the competing data streams, weighing their diminishing options. The rescue fleet's latest transmission showed their estimated arrival time had increased to 9 to 4 minutes, far beyond the swift response's remaining operational capacity. Engineering, what's the status of the reactor containment grid? Morrison demanded. Implementing emergency stabilization measures, Torres replied. The resonance patterns are helping maintain power flow, but we're seeing concerning fluctuations in the containment field strength. Simpson's medical sensors registered a sharp spike in crystalline instability. Bridge, core matrix degradation accelerating. Recommend immediate reduction in resonance amplification. Hayes's tactical display showed their current trajectory through the debris field. Structural integrity calculations give us a 31% chance of surviving the shortcut at current power levels. Standard route reduces our survival probability to 12% due to extended exposure time. The ship's reactor warning indicators shifted from amber to red, as containment field strength dropped another 6%. Multiple hull sections reported increasing structural stress as the enhanced engine output pushed their damaged systems to their limits. Medical Bay, how long can the children withstand current resonance levels? Morrison asked. Unknown, Captain, Simpson responded. Their core matrices are exhibiting patterns we've never encountered. The protective compound is reaching maximum saturation levels in the chamber atmosphere. Tor's voice carried across the command channel. Captain, implementing new power distribution algorithms based on Gary's interface data, attempting to create a more stable resonance pattern. The swift response's engines pulsed with renewed energy as Tor's modifications took effect. Power readings stabilized momentarily before new warning indicators flashed across their screens. Reactor containment field fluctuating, Tor's reported. Attempting to compensate through secondary systems, 23 minutes remaining at current consumption levels. Morrison studied the debris field ahead, watching as electromagnetic distortions created shifting patterns in the deadly obstacle course. Their enhanced engine output provided the maneuverability they needed, but every passing moment brought them closer to catastrophic system failure. Medical Bay, status of Kex and Zara. Core matrix destabilization continuing, Simpson transmitted. Outer layer integrity down to 62%. The compound is barely maintaining critical repairs. The ship's structure groaned as another series of impacts tested their weakened hull plates. Emergency bulkheads engaged automatically as new breaches developed in their outer armor. Morrison watched as their operational space continued shrinking. Damaged sections sealed off one by one, while their remaining systems strained against increasing pressures. Their race against time continued, balanced precariously between their need for escape velocity and the growing risk to their crystalline passengers. Each passing moment forced them closer to an impossible choice: maintain their enhanced output or reduce power to protect the children Gary had given his life to save. Diverting weapons power to containment systems, Morrison announced. Tors, prepare for emergency power redistribution. Warning klaxons blared as additional hull plates buckled under the intense pressure. Structural integrity readings dropped to 22% across multiple sections. Captain, Gary's neural interface contains encrypted maintenance protocols, Tors transmitted, his fingers flying across engineering controls. Analyzing Iridian vessel specifications now. Implementing modified containment parameters. The stasis chamber readings stabilized as Tor's team adjusted the containment fields. Simpson's medical displays showed a reduction in crystalline stress patterns across Kex and Zara's outer layers. Radiation warning, the ship's AI announced. Engineering section approaching critical threshold. Tors checked the rapidly climbing radiation indicators. 18 minutes until lethal exposure levels, Captain. Emergency suppression systems engaging, but effectiveness is limited with current power fluctuations. Simpson's voice cut through the emergency channel. "Bridge, I've found something in Gary's data." His shelter pod modifications included specs for a radiation absorption matrix compatible with crystalline structures. "Can you synthesize it?" Morrison asked. "Yes, but we'll need to divert power from life support. Beginning compound synthesis now." The ship lurched violently as a massive debris impact tore through their port side. Sparks erupted from damaged consoles as two power distribution nodes exploded in cascading failure. "Stasis chamber containment fields destabilizing," Simpson reported. "Emergency backups engaged. 12 minutes of stable conditions remaining." Hayes's tactical display updated with new sensor data. "Captain, correlating Gary's interface readings with current debris patterns. I've found an alternative route. Can reduce engine requirements by 17%, but adds 7 minutes to total transit time." The ship's sensors detected new electromagnetic frequencies penetrating the debris field. Morrison's command display identified their source. The steadfast Guardian had begun broadcasting stabilization patterns. "Interference levels dropping," Hayes announced. 23% reduction in local distortions. Simpson studied the changing patterns in her medical readings. "Captain, the children's crystalline structures are adapting to our resonance frequencies. Outer layer integrity improving, but power draw is increasing." "Confirmed," TORS transmitted. "Adjusting distribution algorithms to compensate." Radiation levels still climbing in engineering. 16 minutes remaining. The swift response's hull groaned as they altered course to follow Hayes's plotted trajectory. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically as additional hull breaches developed along their damaged port side. "Synthesizing radiation matrix," Simpson reported. Estimated completion time, 9 minutes. Life support systems at minimum sustainable levels. Tor's voice carried tension as he reported. "Power grid showing signs of cascade failure. Implementing emergency bypass through tertiary systems." "Captain, we're losing stabilization control in sections 18 through 22. The deck plates vibrated beneath their feet as the ship's engines fought against the debris field's gravitational forces. Warning indicators spread across multiple stations as their remaining functional systems approached critical limits. "Medical bay to engineering crystalline adaptation accelerating," Simpson transmitted. "Power draw increasing by 12%. Core matrix stability improving, but putting additional strain on containment systems." Morrison watched as their surviving power distribution network struggled to maintain the delicate balance between engine output and life support requirements. The radiation absorption matrix's synthesis progress appeared on his command display alongside the steadily climbing radiation warnings from engineering. The ship's AI highlighted new structural failures developing along their ventral hull as previously sealed sections began losing atmospheric containment. Their remaining habitable space continued shrinking as emergency systems fought to maintain critical functions with rapidly diminishing resources. "Engineering to bridge, implementing final set of Gary's emergency protocols," TORS announced. "Attempting to stabilize power distribution through modified crystalline resonance patterns. Radiation levels still rising. 15 minutes until critical exposure." The swift response pushed forward through the debris field, its damaged systems straining against multiple cascading failures, while the crew raced to implement their remaining options for survival. "Engineering to bridge emergency protocols engaged," TORS transmitted as radiation alarms blared through the command channel. "Implementing Gary's final containment modifications now." Morrison watched as TOR's team integrated the newly synthesized radiation matrix with their failing containment systems. Power readings fluctuated wildly across his command display as the experimental procedures took effect. "Radiation levels dropping," TORS reported. 3 to 4% reduction in engineering exposure, but Captain Power grids showing signs of imminent failure. The deck plates vibrated beneath their feet as new energy patterns emanated from the stasis chambers. Simpson's medical displays lit up with transformed data streams as Keck's and Zara's crystalline structures began emitting previously unrecorded frequencies. Bridge, the children's outer layers are generating specific resonance patterns, Simpson transmitted. They match frequency codes from Gary's neural interface. Tor's voice cut through the noise. Confirmed. Power efficiency increasing when routing through circuits near the stasis chambers. Implementing emergency grid modifications. A thunderous crack echoed through the ship as the port-side structural frame gave way. Warning klaxons screamed as hull breaches spread across 3 decks. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off the damaged sections. Lost compartments 12 through 17, Tors announced. Shutting down power to affected areas. Containment field fluctuations increasing in the stasis chambers. The ship's communication array crackled with new transmissions cutting through the interference. Swift response. This is Technical Response Chief Engineer Wilson. Transmitting shield harmonic modifications for radiation protection. Morrison nodded to Hayes. Implement those changes. Engineering, integrate shield modifications with Gary's resonance protocols. Tors worked frantically at his station as radiation indicators climbed higher. Molecular breakdown detected in engineering radiation shielding, evacuating all non-essential personnel. He paused, checking readings. Johnson, Chen suit up, everyone else out. Medical bay to engineering, Simpson transmitted. Protective compound degrading faster than projected, beginning emergency synthesis of modified formula. The ship's AI projected new warnings across their screens as reactor containment deterioration accelerated. Tors studied Gary's neural interface data, fingers flying across engineering controls. Establishing crystalline resonance barriers around primary distribution nodes, he reported. Routing power through stasis chamber-adjacent circuits. Warning, increasing stress on children's structural integrity. Simpson's medical displays showed dangerous fluctuations in the crystalline matrices. Core stability dropping. The new compound synthesis requires another 6 minutes. Engineering radiation levels critical, Tors transmitted. Suit protection failing. 5 minutes maximum safe exposure remaining. Morrison watched as Tors implemented the last of Gary's documented procedures. Power readings stabilized momentarily before new alarms blared through the command channel. The engineering readouts showed a potential modification to their power coupling system, one final option that could either save them or tear the ship apart. Captain, Tors said, his voice steady despite the rising radiation. I have a possible solution, but the risk factors are extreme. The swift response pushed onward through the debris field as Morrison weighed their diminishing options. Behind him, Simpson's displays showed the children's protective compound reaching critical degradation levels, while Tor's radiation suit indicators continued their steady decline toward lethal exposure. Implement the modifications, Morrison ordered. Whatever the risk, we're out of alternatives. Tor's fingers flew across his console, integrating the final power coupling adjustments from Gary's neural interface data. The ship systems responded instantly as crystalline resonance patterns merged with their power distribution network. Warning indicators stabilized across multiple stations, but new alarms blared through engineering. Radiation levels at 94% of maximum exposure, Tors transmitted. Johnson, Chen fall back to Section 14, maintaining essential personnel only. The deck plates vibrated as automated systems rerouted power through circuits adjacent to the stasis chambers. Simpson's medical displays lit up with transformed data streams as the radiation absorption matrix took effect. Matrix synthesis complete, Simpson announced, establishing emergency radiation barriers between critical sections. Tors monitored the power fluctuations as barrier fields materialized throughout the ship, implementing cyclic power distribution. Medical Bay confirmed barrier stability. Barriers holding. Safe corridors established between essential areas. A violent shudder ran through the ship as reactor warnings flooded the command channel. Primary coolant system failure, Tors transmitted. Core temperature rising beyond safety limits. Simpson studied the changing patterns in her medical readings. Captain, the children's crystalline structures are absorbing thermal energy from nearby circuits. It's creating a natural heat sink effect. Confirmed, Tors replied. Rerouting coolant flow through stasis chamber adjacent systems, temperature dropping, but getting dangerous resonance fluctuations from the crystals. The ship's tactical display updated with new data from the Steadfast Guardian. Hayes analyzed the incoming transmissions. Captain, detecting localized gravity distortions throughout the debris field. Guardian fleet adjusting course to avoid structural damage. Time to intercept, Morrison asked. Additional 12 minutes added to their arrival window. Simpson's voice cut through the emergency channel. Bridge, detecting stress fractures in the children's outer layers, implementing final dose of protective compound. The ship lurched as support beams failed across multiple decks. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, isolating crew members in separate compartments. Structural integrity at 17%, Tors reported through the damaged communication system, establishing remote access protocols for isolated engineering teams. Morrison watched as Tors accessed the last sections of Gary's neural interface data. Captain, these shutdown procedures. They're specifically designed for crystalline resonance integration. We can contain the radiation, but maintaining power distribution through these damaged circuits. Another series of alarms blared as power surged through the stasis chamber controls. Simpson's monitors flickered and died, replaced by backup systems with limited functionality. Lost primary monitoring capabilities, Simpson transmitted. Backup sensors showing stable core matrices, but their outer crystalline layers are undergoing molecular changes from the power routing. Tors worked to stabilize the failing systems while radiation indicators continued their steady climb. The crystalline resonance patterns intensified, creating feedback loops through the emergency power grid. Implementing shutdown sequence, Tors announced. Routing essential power through crystal-adjacent circuits. Simpson, monitor their stability. Outer layer alterations continuing but core matrices holding. The compound is preventing new stress fractures. The swift responses Hull groaned as gravity distortions pulled at their weakened structure. Hayes tracked the rescue fleet's modified approach vector, while emergency systems fought to maintain the ship's structural integrity. Engineering to bridge shutdown procedures at critical stage. Tors transmitted through the deteriorating communication network. Maintaining minimal operational stability through Gary's protocols, but these gravity waves. Simpson's backup sensors detected new stress patterns forming in the crystalline structures as thermal energy continued flooding through the emergency circuits. The children's outer layers pulsed with transformed resonance frequencies, their molecular structure adapting to the intense power fluctuations. Morrison studied the situational displays as compartmentalized sections of his ship struggled to maintain atmospheric containment. The rescue fleet's estimated arrival time blinked steadily on his command screen, while Tors' team worked to preserve their remaining functional systems. Medical Bay to engineering, Simpson transmitted. Crystal adaptation accelerating. We need to modulate the power flow or risk permanent structural changes. The ship's damaged sensors detected increasing gravitational forces as they pushed forward through the debris field. Emergency bulkheads strained against the mounting pressure, while radiation barriers flickered under the constant power cycling. Tors' voice carried through the static, implementing final resonance adjustments. radiation containment holding but approaching maximum sustainable levels. Tor's fingers moved with practiced precision across his engineering console as warning indicators continued their steady climb. Initiating power cycling sequence, reducing reactor output to 4 to 7%. The deck plating hummed with a lower frequency as the reactor's power diminished. Emergency lighting cast shadows through the corridors while backup systems engaged to maintain critical functions. Engineering, status report on radiation containment, Morrison called through the deteriorating comm system. 22 minutes remaining on suit protection, Tors transmitted. His display showed the molecular breakdown spreading through their radiation shielding. Accessing additional encrypted data from Gary's neural interface, found Iridian containment procedures implementing now. Simpson's medical readouts flickered as new energy patterns emanated from the stasis chambers. Bridge, detecting harmonic resonance from the children. Frequencies match Gary's documented patterns. She studied the changing data streams. Their outer layers are generating localized stability fields. A violent shudder ran through the ship as gravity distortions pulled at their weakened hull. Hayes tracked the destructive waves on his tactical display. Captain, structural integrity dropping to 14%. Guardian fleet transmitting warnings about concentrated gravity waves. Medical bay to engineering, Simpson transmitted. Power grid frequencies are accelerating compound deterioration, modifying atmospheric processors to filter harmful emissions. Tors diverted emergency power through the crystalline-enhanced circuits. Life support indicators stabilized in critical sections as oxygen levels rose back toward minimal safety margins. 31 minutes of atmosphere remaining in emergency reserves, maintaining distribution through stasis chamber-adjacent systems. The ship's AI projected reactor containment vessel schematics across their screens. Molecular stress patterns spread through the structure like spiderwebs. Johnson, Chen, Tors called to his engineering team. Begin calibrating resonance frequencies for containment field generation. We get one chance at this. Simpson monitored the children's vital signs as power surged through nearby circuits, detecting increased stress on crystalline matrices, outer layer molecular structure showing signs of transformation. Confirmed, Tors replied, establishing resonance barrier network. Medical bay ready to activate filters. The deck plates vibrated as crystalline energy patterns merged with their failing power systems. Emergency bulkheads groaned under the mounting gravitational pressure while radiation barriers flickered with each power cycle. Atmospheric processors modified, Simpson announced. Engaging frequency filters now. Tors watched as Johnson and Chen calibrated the final resonance frequencies. Power readouts stabilized momentarily before fluctuating wildly across his display. Initiating Iridian containment procedures. Stand by for field generation. The ship's remaining sensors detected the approaching gravity waves as they pushed through the debris field. Hull plating buckled under the increasing strain, while emergency systems fought to maintain their structural integrity. Medical bay to bridge, Simpson transmitted. Children's stability fields expanding. Power distribution networks showing signs of recovery. Morrison studied the tactical display as new sensor data streamed in from the technical response. The gravity distortions grew more concentrated with each passing moment, threatening to tear their weakened vessel apart. Engineering to all stations, Tors announced. Containment field calibration complete, generating resonance barriers now. Energy patterns rippled through the ship's power grid as crystalline frequencies synchronized with their failing systems. The reactor containment vessel's structural readings began to stabilize as new radiation barriers materialized throughout critical sections. Radiation levels dropping in adjacent compartments, Simpson reported. Compound deterioration rate decreasing under filtered atmosphere. The swift response pushed forward through space as automated systems routed power through the crystalline-enhanced circuits. Warning indicators continued their steady climb while TORS monitored the reactor's reduced output. Maintaining minimal operational stability, he transmitted through the static. But these gravity waves. His voice trailed off as new distortion patterns appeared on their sensors. Simpson's emergency displays showed the children's outer layers pulsing with transformed energy signatures as their stability fields expanded throughout the ship. The protective compound's molecular structure held steady under the filtered atmosphere, while power fluctuations rippled through adjacent systems. Medical bay to engineering, Simpson called. Children's crystalline resonance is intensifying. Their stability fields are merging with the containment barriers. TORS studied the changing energy patterns as Gary's emergency procedures integrated with their failing systems. The ship's hull creaked under mounting gravitational forces while radiation containment held at maximum sustainable levels. A violent tremor shook the swift response as the first major gravity wave slammed into their port side. Support beams screamed under the strain, snapping like brittle twigs throughout multiple decks. Structural integrity dropping to 11%, Hayes transmitted, his voice tight. Multiple hull breaches detected in non-critical sections. TORS accessed the ship's remaining structural diagnostics. Johnson, begin emergency bracing procedures. Strip non-essential compartments for support materials. Through the flickering emergency displays, TORS watched as his engineering teams dismantled storage lockers and internal paneling. They welded makeshift supports across weakened sections, reinforcing critical junctions with salvaged materials. Medical bay to engineering, Simpson called. Stasis chamber environmental controls failing, implementing manual atmospheric regulation. The ship's sensors detected new energy signatures emanating from the children's crystalline forms. Their bodies pulsed with absorbed thermal energy, creating intricate patterns that spread through adjacent power circuits. Detecting adaptive formations in their core matrices, Simpson reported. They're distributing the thermal load, but their outer layers are showing increased strain patterns. A burst of static filled the command channel as an encrypted transmission cut through the interference. Swift response. This is Dr. Wilson aboard Steadfast Guardian, transmitting emergency procedures for gravity distortion survival. TORS studied the incoming technical data, cross-referencing it with Gary's neural interface information. His fingers moved rapidly across the engineering console, implementing new stability field configurations. Routing power through crystalline-enhanced circuits, he announced. Establishing localized field network using resonance patterns. Warning indicators flashed across his display as coolant pressure dropped throughout the primary distribution system. Temperature readings spiked dangerously in critical sections. Chen analyzed these radiation absorption readings, TORS transmitted. The matrix is showing unexpected heat dissipation properties when exposed to specific frequencies. Chen's voice crackled through the damaged comm system. Confirmed. Implementing emergency cooling procedures using crystalline resonance. The deck plates vibrated as power surged through their failing grid. Emergency lighting flickered while radiation containment fields fluctuated around the reactor core. Medical bay detecting critical changes in compound stability, Simpson called. Accessing Gary's data on Iridian biological responses. Implementing formula modifications now. TORS monitored the radiation levels as they approached lethal thresholds. The protective compound's molecular structure shifted, adapting to resonate with the children's evolving crystalline patterns. A series of explosions rocked the ship as structural supports failed across multiple sections. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, isolating vital systems behind layers of reinforced plating. Engineering teams maintain remote access protocols. Tors transmitted through the deteriorating communication network. Continue implementing emergency procedures from Gary's interface data. Simpson's emergency sensors recorded the changes in the children's crystalline matrices. Their cores pulsed with transformed energy signatures, while the modified compound created stable protective barriers around their damaged outer layers. Medical bay to engineering, Simpson called. Compound integration successful, detecting improved stability in their molecular structure. The swift response shuddered as another gravity wave impacted their weakened hull. Tors accessed the last functional engineering stations through damaged relay systems, coordinating repair efforts while radiation warnings continued their steady climb. Reactor containment showing signs of stabilization, Chen reported. Heat dissipation network holding at 6 to 3% efficiency. Tors studied the changing energy patterns as crystalline resonance merged with their emergency systems. The makeshift structural supports groaned under mounting gravitational pressure, while stability fields flickered throughout the ship. Maintaining critical power distribution, he transmitted. Continue monitoring compound interaction with radiation matrices. A deafening crack echoed through the swift response as the next gravity wave struck. Support beams collapsed across 3 decks, sending tremors through the remaining structure. Structural integrity at 8%, Hayes transmitted, his voice barely audible through the static. Multiple critical failures detected. Tor's fingers flew across his console, activating emergency magnetic field generators. Crystalline energy from the children's chambers pulsed through the power grid, creating a web of electromagnetic force that held the buckling hull together. Magnetic containment fields active, he announced, diverting power from life support to maintain structural cohesion. Simpson's medical displays flashed urgent warnings as oxygen levels dropped throughout the ship, detecting unprecedented changes in the children's crystalline structure. Their outer layers are developing new lattice formations. The reactor containment vessel's readouts drew Tor's attention. Hairline fractures spread through the molecular structure as radiation levels pushed against maximum tolerances. Chen analyzed these containment readings, Tors called. 17 minutes until complete failure. Technical response to swift response. A transmission cut through the interference. Detecting stable gravity corridor formation. Transmitting navigational data. Hayes studied the incoming sensor information. Maneuvering systems at 23%. We can't maintain the necessary precision for corridor navigation. Tors observed the energy patterns emanating from the stasis chambers. The children's crystalline forms pulsed with transformed frequencies, creating localized areas where gravitational forces seemed to dissipate. Medical Bay, he transmitted. Are you seeing these nullification effects? Confirmed, Simpson replied. Their adaptation matches theoretical models from Gary's data, but these power fluctuations are destabilizing our remaining systems. Tors accessed the neural interface data, studying the encrypted Iridian sensor logs. We can use their resonance patterns for emergency maneuvering. Route 8 to 4% of remaining power through the stasis chamber circuits. Warning, the ship's AI announced. Lethal radiation levels detected in sections 7 through 12. Simpson's team worked rapidly, modifying the protective compound's molecular structure, creating sealed environment around critical stations. We have 14 minutes of protection before compound breakdown. The engineering displays showed power distribution networks approaching critical instability. Tors implemented the Iridian maneuvering procedures, carefully balancing energy flow through the damaged circuits. Johnson, monitor these resonance frequencies, Tors ordered. Match our field harmonics to the children's nullification patterns. The swift response's hull groaned as gravitational forces pulled at the weakened structure. Magnetic fields pulsed through the framework, maintaining critical connections as more support beams threatened to fail. Medical bay to engineering, Simpson called. Children's lattice structures are actively redistributing thermal energy, power grids showing signs of stabilization. Tours watched as the crystalline resonance merged with their emergency systems. The ship's remaining functional circuits hummed with transformed energy as they prepared for their desperate escape attempt. All stations, he transmitted, implementing final emergency procedures. Maintain current power distribution through the gravity corridor. The vessel's sensors detected the intensifying gravitational forces ahead. Through the forward viewports, space itself seemed to twist and distort, creating a narrow pathway through the chaos. Simpson's emergency displays tracked radiation spreading through adjacent compartments, while the modified compound maintained their protective bubble. The children's crystalline forms continued evolving, their complex lattices generating waves of stabilizing energy throughout the ship. Initiating corridor approach, Hayes announced, manipulating the damaged maneuvering controls. Resonance fields holding at designated frequencies. The deck plates vibrated as the swift response pushed forward, guided by the crystalline nullification effects. Emergency bulkheads creaked under the strain, while magnetic containment fields fought to hold the vessel together. Coolant pressure dropping in primary systems, Chen reported, implementing emergency thermal regulation through crystal matrices. Tours monitored the failing reactor containment as they entered the gravity corridor. The radiation absorption network struggled to maintain stability while power surged through the stasis chamber circuits. Medical bay to bridge, Simpson transmitted. Compound integrity at 6 to 7%, maintaining critical station protection. The ship shuddered as gravitational forces pulled at their reinforced hull. Through the crystalline-enhanced systems, Tours guided power distribution to match the children's evolving resonance patterns. Entering maximum distortion zone, Hayes called out. Maneuvering thrusters responding to nullification fields. Engineer Tours accessed the last functional power relays, balancing critical systems as they pushed deeper into the gravity corridor. The radiation containment vessel's structural readings continued their steady decline, while magnetic fields held their disintegrating ship together. Tours' hands moved across the failing control systems as proximity alerts screamed through the command channel. The swift response lurched sideways, metal shrieking as gravitational forces twisted the hull. Structural integrity at 6%, Hayes transmitted, his voice barely audible through waves of static. Main navigation computers offline, switching to manual emergency protocols. The maneuvering thrusters fired in precise bursts, following the encoded Iridian navigation patterns from Gary's neural interface. Each adjustment sent tremors through the vessel's weakened frame as Hayes fought to maintain their trajectory through the corridor. A series of alarms blared through engineering as radiation containment systems cascaded into failure. 3 technicians collapsed near the reactor housing, their protective suits providing insufficient shielding against the lethal exposure. Medical emergency in engineering, Chen called through the deteriorating comm system. 3 crew members down from radiation exposure. Simpson coordinated the emergency response through damaged relay circuits, dispatching medical teams to engineering. Radiation absorption matrix showing molecular destabilization. Tours remained at his station, protected only by the modified absorption compound as it approached its failure threshold. His skin tingled with residual radiation while he accessed the crystalline resonance controls. The stasis chambers housing Kex and Zara pulsed with intensifying energy signatures. Their evolving crystalline structures generated expanding fields of localized stability, creating protective bubbles that helped hold the disintegrating ship together. Medical bay detecting accelerated deterioration in their outer crystalline layers, Simpson transmitted. Core matrices showing signs of permanent structural changes. A massive power surge ripped through the remaining functional circuits. Emergency lighting died across multiple decks as life support systems went dark. Oxygen reserves engaging, the ship's AI announced. 8 minutes of atmospheric stability remaining at current power levels. Tor's fingers flew across his console, redirecting life support through the crystalline stabilized circuits. The children's resonance patterns maintained atmospheric integrity, but sensor readings showed increasing stress on their molecular structures. Steadfast Guardian to swift response, Captain Drake's transmission cut through the interference, establishing emergency power link, routing additional energy to your critical systems. The incoming power surge provided temporary stability to their failing systems, but the reactor containment field fluctuated dangerously as energy levels spiked. A thunderous crack echoed through the vessel as deck plating buckled under gravitational pressure. Entire sections of the ship collapsed, forcing crew members to evacuate through emergency corridors. Medical bay hull breach detected, Simpson called. Evacuating critical equipment to emergency shelters, maintaining remote stasis chamber control through backup interfaces. The swift response shuddered violently as they entered the corridor's highest distortion zone. Crystalline resonance fields pulsed through the power grid, fighting to maintain structural cohesion as gravitational forces threatened to tear the ship apart. Radiation containment approaching total failure, Chen reported from his emergency station. Matrix breakdown accelerating in engineering sections. Tors monitored the power distribution network as circuits overloaded throughout the ship. The children's resonance patterns created webs of stability through the failing systems, but each pulse increased the strain on their deteriorating crystalline forms. Oxygen reserves at 60%, Hayes transmitted. Emergency, atmospheric systems holding through crystalline-enhanced circuits. The deck plates vibrated beneath Tor's feet as another gravitational wave slammed into their port side. Warning indicators flashed across his display, while the reactor containment field approached critical instability. Steadfast Guardian, maintain power transmission, Tors called through the static, routing emergency energy through resonance-stabilized systems. The swift response pushed deeper into the gravity corridor as radiation alarms screamed through multiple decks. Tors balanced power distribution through the crystalline network, while ship systems continued their cascade of failures around him. Medical teams reporting successful evacuation of engineering personnel, Simpson transmitted. Stasis chamber resonance fields holding at decreased efficiency. Hayes manipulated the emergency maneuvering controls, following the precise Iridian protocols as gravitational distortions increased. The vessel's hull creaked under mounting pressure, while magnetic containment fields struggled to maintain structural integrity. Tors accessed the last functional engineering stations, watching radiation levels climb toward lethal thresholds. The protective compound around his station showed advanced signs of molecular breakdown as he worked to preserve their failing systems through the children's evolving resonance patterns. Tor's hands moved with practiced efficiency across the failing control systems. A piercing shriek of metal echoed through engineering as multiple shield emitters overloaded simultaneously. Shield integrity down to 31%, Chen called out, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Primary emitter grid failing across all sectors. Tors accessed the emergency distribution nodes near the stasis chambers, implementing power cycling protocols. Routing shield energy through chamber-adjacent circuits. A thunderous crack signaled a partial breach in the reactor containment system's fourth section. Radiation warning indicators flashed urgent red across engineering displays. Sealing emergency bulkheads in Section 4, Hayes transmitted. Radiation levels at 87% of survivable threshold in control sectors. Simpson's voice cut through a burst of static. Medical Bay detecting unprecedented resonance synchronization between subjects. Their crystalline matrices are achieving theoretical maximum efficiency, but outer layer deterioration is accelerating. Through the forward viewports, Tors watched the rescue fleet's coordinated approach. The steadfast Guardian and technical response maneuvered into optimal power transmission positions, their energy beams providing crucial support to the swift response's failing systems. Power link established, Drake transmitted, transferring emergency energy to your structural reinforcement grid. Tors directed the incoming power surge through magnetic field generators, stabilizing critical hull sections. The ship's integrity indicators stabilized at 5%, but reactor containment readings fluctuated dangerously. A harsh buzzing filled the command channel as atmospheric processors failed across multiple decks. Warning lights bathed the engineering station in pools of amber. Oxygen reserves critical, the ship's AI announced. 4 minutes of breathable atmosphere remaining at current consumption rates. Rerouting air circulation through crystal resonance circuits, Chen transmitted. Maintaining atmospheric integrity in essential compartments only. Simpson's emergency displays showed accelerating breakdown in the protective compound's molecular structure. Compound experiencing atomic level deterioration, initiating emergency purification protocols through remaining processors. Tors accessed Gary's neural interface, scanning through the final encrypted files. His eyes widened as he discovered crucial data about emergency crystalline containment procedures. Medical Bay, are you seeing these stabilization protocols? Tors transmitted. We can create a temporary containment field using synchronized resonance patterns. Confirmed, Simpson replied. But radiation exposure to the matrices would be extreme. Their outer layers are already showing microfissures. The swift response shuddered as another gravitational wave impacted their weakened hull. Emergency lighting flickered across multiple decks while power distribution networks approached critical instability. Implementing Gary's containment procedures, Tors announced, carefully adjusting power flow through the crystalline-enhanced circuits, redirecting radiation through secondary shielding arrays. The stasis chambers pulsed with intensifying energy as Keck's and Zara's synchronized resonance patterns generated expanding fields of localized stability. Their crystalline forms emitted waves of transformed energy that helped hold the disintegrating vessel together. Medical Bay detecting increased strain on subject matrices, Simpson called. Outer layer deterioration accelerating under radiation exposure. Tors monitored the failing systems as they pushed toward the gravity corridor's outer boundary. The rescue fleet maintained precise formation around them, power transfer beams providing essential support to their emergency containment field. 2 minutes of compound integrity remaining, Chen reported. Radiation absorption matrix showing critical molecular destabilization. The deck plates vibrated beneath Tors' feet as he balanced power distribution through the last functional circuits. Emergency displays tracked the spreading radiation, while crystalline resonance patterns fought to maintain critical system stability. Adjusting approach vector, Hayes transmitted through waves of interference. Maintaining emergency maneuvering protocols through synchronized resonance fields. Tors accessed the final power distribution nodes, watching radiation levels climb toward maximum tolerance. The swift response's hull groaned under intense gravitational pressure, while multiple critical systems approached total failure around them. Tors' hands moved across the failing control systems as radiation warnings blared through engineering. The last functional displays showed critical containment failure spreading through multiple sections. Emergency stabilization protocol engaged, Tors transmitted, accessing Gary's final encrypted files. Initiating synchronized resonance field through stasis chambers. Energy surged through the crystalline-enhanced circuits as the stasis chamber's output synchronized. A shimmering field of transformed radiation expanded outward, containing the lethal exposure within carefully controlled boundaries. Containment field holding at 60% efficiency, Chen reported, but stasis chamber integrity dropping rapidly. Through the viewport, Torres watched the steadfast Guardian and technical response move into position alongside their failing vessel. Magnetic grapples extended from both rescue ships, latching onto the swift response's weakened hull with precise mechanical clicks. Physical contact established, Drake transmitted, initiating emergency power transfer through direct connection ports. The deck stabilized as support energy flowed through the new connections. Hull integrity indicators showed a slight increase from 2 to 3% as the rescue vessel's structural fields reinforced their failing superstructure. A blinding flash filled engineering as Keck's and Zara's crystalline matrices achieved perfect synchronization. The resonance pattern expanded explosively, interfacing with the rescue vessel's power grid. The swift response's structural collapse slowed to a crawl as the stabilizing field permeated every deck. "Medical team, prepare for emergency transfer," Simpson called. Pressure corridor integrity confirmed between vessels. Torres monitored the reactor containment readings as Simpson's team moved the children through the emergency routes. Their crystalline structures pulsed with transformed energy, exactly matching the theoretical patterns from Gary's final calculations. Crew evacuation commencing through designated corridors, Hayes transmitted. All non-essential personnel proceed to rescue vessel boarding points. The radiation absorption compound around Torres Station showed complete molecular breakdown as he accessed the reactor controls. His skin burned from exposure, but he maintained focus on the critical shutdown sequence. Implementing final containment procedures, Torres announced, routing power through the crystalline resonance field. Reactor shutdown protocols engaged. The swift response shuddered as its power plant went dark. Emergency lighting switched to backup power while Torres confirmed successful containment of the reactor's lethal emissions. Engineering station evacuated, Chen transmitted. Torres, get to the pressure corridor immediately. Torres' vision blurred as he stumbled toward the emergency exit. Medical teams in radiation gear rushed to assist him, administering emergency treatment as they moved through the rescue vessel's airlock. In the steadfast Guardian's medical bay, Simpson's team worked to stabilize the evacuated crew. Initial scans showed severe radiation exposure but survivable levels thanks to Gary's modified absorption compound. Stasis chamber readings stabilizing, Simpson reported, monitoring Keck's and Zara's vital signs. Core matrices maintaining integrity despite outer layer adaptations. The swift response's hull finally gave way behind them, buckling under gravitational pressure. But its precious cargo and crew had escaped saved by the precise application of Gary's final protective measures, and the remarkable resonance patterns of two young Iridian children whose survival would change everything. Through the medical bay viewport, Torres watched the transformed crystalline patterns ripple across Keck's and Zara's sleeping forms. The unique adaptations in their structures promised new possibilities for human-Iridian cooperation, purchased at a terrible price but offering hope for the future. Preparing jump sequence, Drake announced as medical teams continued their work. Setting course for Terran Iridian Cultural Exchange Center.